the Imperial Era from scratch. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 426 The Nameless Devil. Whether Barry will be left with any psychological scars remains to be seen, but perhaps wandering around Winterfell will help him recover faster. Just like Eddard Stark, after meeting David, King of Winter, in the front hall, he then wandered around Winterfell with his daughter. The longer he wandered, the more he understood this magical city, and the more he marveled at it. How could there be such a magical city in the world? He lost track of time in his fascination with the sightseeing. Fortunately, Winterfell had no shortage of inns, not to mention the Winter Hotel, but with Winterfell's growing prosperity, privately run inns had also proliferated. After settling into one, Eddard marveled again, such a sumptuous dinner, clean and comfortable beds and bedding, and the miraculous amenities of running water, showers, and toilets, and this was just an inn? What kind of life did His Majesty the King live? In comparison, his own life in Winterfell was like that of a wildling. His proud Winterfell, compared to this Winterfell, must seem like a rural village. Maybe it would be better. Thinking of this, Eddard suddenly felt that letting Winterfell rule Westeros wouldn't be such a bad idea. Moreover, with the power Winterfell possessed, perhaps they wouldn't have to worry about the threat from the north. Furthermore, with Winterfell's wealth, it seemed they wouldn't have to worry about the long, cold winter that the people of Westeros dreaded the most. David wondered what Eddard Stark was thinking about in the hotel right now. After a brief chat with Tony about Westeros, he was drawn to something else. The design for New Glamorgan. Yes, Your Majesty. David looked at Edwin Van Cleef in front of him, the former leader of the Stonemasons Guild and current Minister of Intelligence for the Kingdom of Winterfell. He didn't have the shrewdness of an intelligence officer at all. Instead, his eyes sparkled and he was discussing with David what New Glamorgan should look like. Why did you suddenly think of this? Ever since Natasha and Ethan joined the intelligence department, I've had a lot more worries. Even things involving assassination and stealth skills are handled by Vanessa, in other words, Natasha, the Black Widow, and Ethan Hunt, the reckless gambler, freed Edwin Van Cleef from the rigors of intelligence work, allowing him to return to his beloved architectural design. Isn't the reconstruction of Iron Tree Keep satisfying? Iron Tree Keep definitely needed to be rebuilt. It was an entire new city, but why did Edwin Van Cleef seem unconcerned about such a massive undertaking? Rebuilding Iron Tree Keep isn't challenging at all. We can just apply the same infrastructure template as Winterfell. David finally understood Edwin's response. For Edwin Van Cleef, such repetitive work held no challenge. Designing new buildings was far more enjoyable. Your Majesty, what are your requirements for your new residence? First, it has to be large enough, especially the first floor. At least there should be enough space for Cybertronians to move freely. David knew that with the expansion of Winter City, the current Glamorgan Castle was indeed a bit underwhelming. Building a larger one was inevitable. It wouldn't be a waste of resources and manpower, and the diggers wouldn't complain if they had no work. Besides having a high and spacious first floor, the entire building also has to be tall enough. David was talking when he suddenly remembered a news story he had stumbled across in his previous life. It was about a building in the southwest known as the White House of the Celestial Empire. The building's exterior was exactly what David liked, and it was similar to the style of the current Glamorgan Castle, like an enlarged version. Especially at night, when the lights were on, the entire building was bathed in a golden glow, a perfect match for David, who wielded the holy light. Simply copying the building's exterior allowed him to customize the interior layout. For example, while the first floor had ample space and height, he could also reserve a large room as the main hall, where he could receive guests as king. Design a spacious and large conference room so Cybertronians can attend meetings in person, rather than having to rely on holographic attendance as they do now, as if they were ostracized by the other races of Winterfell. Edwin watched David grow increasingly excited as he spoke, never expecting His Majesty to be even more excited than he was when designing the new residence. What frustrates Edwin is that, in just a few words, His Majesty has already decided on the overall appearance of the new building. Fortunately, he still has to be responsible for the detailed design, otherwise this job would be a lot less fun. When does Your Majesty think it's appropriate to begin construction? When I lead the kingdom's army to fight the temple, then we can begin construction on this new house. Winterfell's army is currently suppressing a rebellion within the former Kingdom of Tiran. Once all of Tiran's lands are under his control, he will personally lead the Winter Knights to the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt and launch a war of revenge for Tiran. He will then spend considerable time in the south, giving Digger and the craftsmen plenty of time to complete the construction of the new house. He wasn't worried about the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt and the temple falling too quickly, leaving him with his troops withdrawn before the house was finished. Even if the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt was defeated, wouldn't there still be the Thordarinmer Empire? While rampaging across the Bronia continent with his vast army made him seem like a warmonger, he had ample reason for it. The Thordarinmer Empire was chosen as his next target simply because the orcs were expanding behind them. If the orcs were to land and expand within the New Alan Federation, David would attack the New Alan Federation first. It was that simple. Anyone who stood in his way of the orcs would be attacked. Watching Van Cleef leave, David glanced back at the now completely dark night. Winter City's nights were no longer the pitch black they once were. Besides the bright streetlights, every household would light up. As Winter City's population grew, these lights merged into a vast expanse, gradually transforming the city into a city that never sleeps, in the first half of the night, of course. After the lights in the residential buildings dimmed in the late evening, Winter City, though not yet known for its vibrant nightlife, fell into profound silence. David sat by the window, gazing into the distance as the lights in the residential areas gradually dimmed, yet he had no desire to return to his room. These days, rest or not didn't really matter to him. He stuck to his usual routine, simply to feel more alone. Only when most of the residential areas were dark, with only a few lights still on, did David stand up and prepare to retire to his room. Just as he turned off the lights in his office and debated whether to go to Eva's room, Helen's, or his own bedroom to rest, David suddenly noticed something. Interesting. Following his intuition, David didn't go to anyone else's room, nor did he return to his own bedroom, but instead headed to the rooftop. A chill wind whipped across his face, but David, dressed only in a shirt, paid no mind. After scanning the deserted rooftop to confirm there were no other guests, David's gaze settled on a remarkably dark corner. It was as if a thick cloud of ink had been spilled over the place, a blackness so black it swallowed up all other colors. Is that you? The one who invited me here? Interesting. The shadow slowly transformed, eventually transforming into a curvy humanoid. David looked at the creature before him, with red skin, horns on its head, and a pair of bat wings on its back. The word demon immediately flashed through his mind. The creature was clad in black armor with high defensive power, so high that David's eyes were filled with red. For a moment, he was unsure where to attack first. You managed to escape my control. No wonder you sent me all this way. Oh, David was about to ask a few questions, gathering some information, when the demon across from him defied all expectations and, with a wave of its hand, unleashed a dark red fireball imbued with a strange power. This was just the beginning. After unleashing the fireball, the red-skinned female demon unsheathed a massive scythe from nowhere, wings spread, and with astonishing speed, she swooped behind David, poised to slash through him while he parried the fireball. Bang! Bang! The fireball exploded, and the scythe struck David's cheek with a powerful blow. But the blood the demon had anticipated didn't splatter. Neither the fireball nor the scythe in her hand harmed the human before her. Oh no! Having realized the target had escaped her control and was more dangerous than she'd anticipated, the female demon had already raised the threat level to the highest level. Otherwise, she wouldn't have given up on her beloved toy with her prey and gone all out to kill him. Unexpectedly, this person was even more dangerous than she'd anticipated. Even her full-strength attack couldn't even break his skin. This kind of enemy was simply not one she could handle. Run! Seeing the situation was not right, the female demon immediately tried to escape. But barely had she formed the thought when she felt a terrifyingly powerful hand grip her head. The next second, the world spun. Then, her head made direct contact with the ground, radiating a golden glow. Her face trembled with pain, as if burned by a blazing flame. As she screamed, the demon's entire body was enveloped in divine fire, becoming the fuel for its fierce combustion. This time, there was no screaming. With David's current strength, the divine fire he unleashed was so powerful that even a small demon could not withstand it. The moment the flames ignited, the demon was incinerated to ash. Chapter 427 Devil Islands. After gathering up the holy light that had been evenly spread across his roof, protecting it from destruction. David turned to look at the fallen sickle. As the demon died, the sickle was about to fly away, but David, using the holy light version of the mage's hand, firmly grasped it, forcing it to stay where it was. Raising his hand, the sickle flew from the ground into his grasp. David examined the weapon carefully, the power he felt bearing a strong resemblance to the one he had felt on the other side of the planet. So, the source of this demon was clear. Not surprising, after all, I've been exposed to the gods. Because of his presence, the orcs landing on the Bronia continent had become significantly more complex. It would be strange to say the gods hadn't reacted at all. After all, these creatures weren't NPC villains in role-playing games, unpredictable and unresponsive. Just as David was about to examine the sickle more closely, he was surprised to discover that it still contained the demon's soul. When the sickle realized it couldn't escape, its internal energy began to surge violently. Was it about to explode? So cruel, he released holy light from his hand, enveloping the sickle, but it didn't prevent the explosion. The entire sickle erupted in a burst of red light before gradually calming down. When David withdrew the holy light from his hand, the sickle, which had relied on it to maintain its form, turned to ash. David gazed at the pitch-black sky, gently shook his hand, as if to shake off the dust, and then returned to Glamorgan Castle to rest. Have enemies infiltrated Glamorgan Castle? Over breakfast, David casually recounted the events of the previous night. Eva and Helen were both surprised. Laura, after examining David and confirming that he showed no injuries, continued to eat her breakfast. Who is it? An assassin from the Templars? A spy from the Sodermer Empire? Judging by the current situation, these two factions were the most likely to have sent the assassins. And Marcus Ingram Furball seemed a strong suspect as well. Neither. It's a demon. Should it be a demon? Bat wings, horns, and a tail. It looked like a demon, or maybe a succubus? Demon. Eva and Helen shuddered. Neither of them had imagined that demons existed in this world. Although they knew there were gods in this world and had witnessed many mysterious powers, and they had mastered powers like the arcane and the holy light and even fought demons in dungeons, they had never imagined that such creatures existed on the continent of Bronia. Don't overthink it. The demon I encountered yesterday was just a species like Cybertron and the orcs. Considering the direction the demon was currently flying, it was likely a minion of one of those gods. Fly? You didn't kill the demon. Of course I did, but this creature has some unique ways to survive. The destruction of her body hadn't killed the demon. Her soul was still hidden within the weapon. The weapon's explosion and self-destruction hadn't destroyed her soul either, but instead released teleportation magic to transport it to a safe area. Of course, that was just her own assumption. After David discovered the weapon situation, he secretly placed a mark on the demon's soul. With a demon's strength, it was completely unaware of David's manipulations, and its soul, bearing David's mark, returned in the direction it had come from. Although David didn't reveal everything he had done, the women present, each more shrewd than the last, guessed everything without him needing to elaborate, even anticipating his next move. You want to use this demon's eyes to explore the continent. The opportunity presented itself, so why not seize it? David ate the last bite of his breakfast, finished his juice, and prepared to begin his work for the day. First, he'd go to the office to see if there were any new reports. He'd check on the Winter Legion's battle progress at Dragon Keep. All was going well. Then, he'd monitor the developments within Winter City. His work for the day was essentially over. Checking the time, David saw it had only been half an hour since breakfast, leaving him with a full day to himself. Thinking there wasn't anything in particular he wanted to do, he simply sat at his desk, practicing alchemy and analyzing the folded crystal while keeping an eye on the demon in the distance. Protected by powerful demonic power, the female demon's soul sped towards its homeland, soon leaving the northern plains and reaching the ocean, its flight direction turning slightly southeast. The boundless blue water quickly turned red, its vibrant crimson giving the entire area an eerie hue. David was just marveling at the idea of such an ocean on the back of Bronia when scattered islands appeared ahead. The demon's altitude began to drop, and it was quickly heading straight for one of the islands. Not heading to that continent. This was a bit surprising to David. After careful calculation, the Red Ocean and the archipelago seemed to lie precisely between Bronia and another continent, slightly closer to the back. In other words, the archipelago could serve as a defensive perimeter for that continent? Just as David was considering whether to resort to a leapfrog attack and breach the island defenses, the demon's soul plunged into a pool of blood red, thick, and scalding water on one of the islands. David immediately felt a surge of immense energy converge on the demon's soul, revitalizing the already weakened, almost crumbling demon. The immense energy and vitality rebuilt a new body. In mere seconds, the demon, reduced to ash by David's holy light, was reborn. Rising from the thick, blood-red water, the female demon took in her paler complexion, feeling the weakened demonic power within her. Her expression was grim. Yet, she felt a surge of gratitude for having escaped the terrifying human. A chorus of emotions swirled within her, culminating in a sigh. She couldn't complain, only her bad luck for accepting such a mission. Emerging from the pool of blood, a tall, muscular male demon glanced at her in surprise. "I didn't expect to see you here, Norma, just resurrected." "It's normal." The resurrected female demon Norma was sleek and smooth. The demon opposite merely glanced in surprise, then pointed at a nearby box and looked away, paying no further attention. Norma, unconcerned, walked over to the box, found the right armor, and donned it. Seeing her skin only slightly red, Norma sighed again. Regardless, it was time to get the job done. Spreading her wings, the resurrected Norma, now clad in her new gear, soared into the sky, heading towards another island. The resurrected demon, completely unaware that someone was aboard her, observing everything in the archipelago through her eyes. The scattered islands and the surrounding waters shone a dark red, seemingly imbued with a powerful force, but what struck David was that the area didn't cause him any discomfort, as if the Red Sea hadn't been altered, it had always been this way. Soon, Norma flew to a relatively large island. The environment of this island can be said to be quite harsh. The whole island is like a volcano that is erupting at any time, with pungent smoke and rolling magma everywhere. In such an environment, most life forms will definitely stay away, but for demons, it is a perfect habitat. David can see a large number of demons gathered on this island through Norma's eyes, and one of them is the most conspicuous. This demon has a very conspicuous body shape. After all, it is nearly 20 meters high, and it is difficult to ignore even if you want to. In addition, Norma flew straight towards this huge demon, and David was a little curious, can this guy sense his existence? Lord Millard, the gigantic demon known as Millard, looked at Norma. Noticing she had just used the resurrection pool, he immediately realized her mission had failed. Failed? Yes, sir, Norma admitted, immediately explaining, that human was far more powerful than I expected. Millard was already upset with Norma's failure. After all, their master rarely gave extra instructions, and he had entrusted Norma with such an important mission, only to fail. What if the master doubted his clan's ability to handle matters? We failed to kill the target, so what about the rest? How is your investigation going on the northern plains? Norma suddenly lost her answer. She had assumed a mere human was irrelevant, so she headed straight for Winter City. She planned to find the target, manipulate him as she pleased, and extract any intelligence she wanted from him. Unexpectedly, the target was completely uncontrollable and, with a sudden move, struck her to death. Seeing Norma remain silent, Millard immediately guessed the answer. You haven't completed any of the tasks I assigned you. I'm sorry, Master Millard. Norma had barely opened her mouth when she was blasted to the ground by a volley of energy unleashed by Millard. The terrifying and ferocious demonic energy shattered the demonic power within her, reducing her newly restored demonic body to ash once again. The next moment, Norma, now in her new body, floated in the resurrection pool with a bitter face. After this resurrection, Norma was reduced to a small demon, the lowest of the pack. Chapter 428, The Righteous Avengers Gather. Norma had become a low-level demon, with a small body, short arms and legs, and an ugly appearance. It was a stark contrast to her previous appearance. David, sensing all these changes, burst out laughing, almost losing the ability to maintain the alchemy array in his hand. Fortunately, his alchemy skills were still quite advanced after years of practice, so the array didn't completely collapse and quickly returned to normal. The polyhedron alchemy array in his hands continued to analyze the folded crystal. David found the unfortunate demon's experience like an entertaining reality show. Watching a reality show is a great way to spend some free time. Moreover, with Norma's eyes, he could gain a better understanding of the Demon Islands, a name David had casually given them because of the large number of demons living there. After testing, David felt even more reassured after discovering that even the giant demon couldn't detect his presence. What a shame. It would be nice if we could explore further southeast, He longed to see what that continent held, but Norma, a recently demoted demon, probably couldn't possibly reach it. The demoted demon Norma had no new armor to wear this time. After leaving the resurrection pool, she could only find a place with minimal demons to rest while she pondered her next move. David suddenly realized that Norma's demonic transformation had not only significantly reduced her strength, but also her intelligence. He wandered around the empty area for a long time, unable to figure out what to do. Desperate, David could only use the mark to gently remind the demon. Restore your strength, level up again. Unaware of the origin of this thought, Norma, who thought it was her own idea, finally understood what she had to do. She looked around and stood there for a long moment before remembering what she should do. Fortunately, her brain was only slowed, not her memory loss. Otherwise, David would have no idea what to do and would have been forced to take whatever he saw. Norma, remembering how to increase her strength, soon arrived at another island. Although her physical strength as a demon remained stronger than a normal person, she had lost the ability to fly. Did this mean that the demon's range was limited to this archipelago? David, realizing this, became even more curious about how these demons increase their power, through training? Or some special ritual? Or perhaps by killing and devouring other lesser demons? He considered several possibilities, but none of them would be this one. Looking at the rows of upright black tubes before him, David couldn't fathom how these cannon-like objects could possibly connect to increasing strength. He had seen many demons here. Besides numerous lesser demons, there were also many higher-level demons with humanoid or semi-human forms. He couldn't tell their rank from their appearance, but the energy fluctuations emanating from each demon varied in intensity. Judging from these fluctuations, it seemed that the humanoid demons were significantly higher in rank. However, this didn't seem to be absolute, as some of the larger demons, with their splayed joints, hooves, and scaly bodies, emanated even stronger energy fluctuations. Is size the true criterion? He thought of the enormous, 20-meter-tall demon, also covered in scales and inhuman-looking, radiating a red glow like magma. While pondering, David continued to observe his surroundings. He soon noticed that the demons would enter the towering iron tubes. With each demon entering, a stream of light would shoot upward from the dark tubes. This stream of light did not continue to rise, it would vanish shortly after leaving the tube. David, already experienced, quickly realized that the streams of light were not simply disappearing, but rather being transported to other worlds. These demons gain power by traveling to other worlds. This discovery surprised David, but upon closer examination, it made sense. The gods behind the demons must possess the ability to connect to other worlds. Every race on the Bronia continent, including the orcs, who currently posed a significant threat to the continent, and the fell energy they wielded, had clear archetypes. David now understood how these gods acquired these archetypes. The little demon Norma soon arrived at an empty tube. The gate below automatically opened after a single shot and closed when a new demon entered. As David watched Norma enter, he began to ponder a new question. Even if this strange teleportation device could transport the mark he'd left on Norma to another world, could he connect to it across dimensions? As he pondered this, David quickly realized his dilemma was over. The demon's method of teleportation was brutal, blasting Norma into a ball of energy before launching it outwards. No wonder each cannon barrel emitted a meteor. It turned out those dazzling meteors were all demons transformed into energy. Furthermore, the teleportation device accurately launched only the demons. The mark David had left on Norma wasn't carried to the other world, remaining within the cannon barrels. David pondered this for a moment, then opened a palm-sized portal nearby, retrieving the energy. I'm done with the fun. While it wasn't what he'd hoped, it was still a positive experience. The demon's increasing power, in particular, felt eerily like a bankrupt version of the Lord God's dimension. Of course, he knew the demons probably didn't have any giant light balls or exchange systems, and he had no idea how these demons would return after being launched to other worlds. But at least knowing the existence of these demons, David began to seriously consider whether to launch a preemptive surprise attack and completely eliminate them before they launched a second wave of attacks against him. Alerting them? No way. They already knew about him. After repelling their initial attempts, the next step would only bring endless trouble. With this in mind, David no longer hesitated. Moreover, unlike the major factions on Bronia or the orcs, these demons were too powerful for ordinary people to deal with. This time, he wouldn't need to recruit ordinary soldiers from Winter. I didn't expect that the first gathering of the Multiverse's Justice Avengers would be due to an enemy from this world. Using his multi-tool to send the call, David went to the conference room alone. Soon after, those who received the message began to arrive. The first to arrive was Iron Mage Tony Stark. After the battle and catharsis in King's Landing, Tony's eyes, no longer shimmering like lights, had returned to normal. Next arrived was Captain America, Steve Rogers, the former Sorcerer Supreme, formerly of Hydra and now leader of the Justice League. With him came Captain Carter. The two captains greeted David, found an empty seat, and quietly waited for the others to arrive. Next, Diana, Arthur, Barry, and Victor, who hadn't yet returned to their own worlds, arrived one after another. Kara, who was more familiar with Winterfell, brought them along. Bruce is gone to notify Clark. David's message was to assemble the Avengers, so Clark couldn't be left out, especially since he was a key member of the team. Then, Zod arrived with Fyra, and Floyd, the deputy leader of the Winter Knights, also arrived. Along with holographic images of Megatron and Optimus Prime, the two commanders of the Cybertron Legion, and mutant representatives Professor Xavier and Storm Aurora Monroe, David had amassed the entirety of Winterfell's extraordinary combat power. This was their first time gathering together, and the inevitable exchange of glances and introductions was inevitable. After a lively market-like atmosphere, Bruce and Clark arrived. David coughed softly, and everyone immediately stopped talking, turning their attention to David, who sat at the head of the table. Last night, an assassin arrived at Castle Glamorgan. He briefly explained the situation, then displayed a holographic image from his Cybertronian form, giving everyone a clearer and more intuitive understanding. Upon seeing the demons from the Demon Islands, everyone understood why David had gathered them. Are these real demons? Barry the Flash couldn't help but interrupt David's introduction. David didn't mind, though. He watched the young Flash explain. I don't know, Barry, but they look just like the demons in legend, and they possess immense power. I mean, did they already exist, or, like the orcs, were they perhaps created by those guys? I'm afraid I can't answer you right away. David didn't know the specifics, but he was certain these demons had direct ties to the gods, perhaps holding a higher status than the orcs and dark elves. Leader, as everyone continued to scrutinize David's holographic image, hoping to gain more information, Megatron, who had been silent until then, suddenly spoke. A massive energy fluctuation has occurred over the eastern waters of the Northern Plains. Megatron, monitoring the entire Northern Plains from the air, had shifted his focus to that area after David began explaining the existence of the Demon Islands in the southeastern waters. Therefore, he was immediately aware of the situation. David closed his eyes and sensed it, immediately realizing that the energy fluctuation Megatron had detected was coming from the gigantic demon Millard. Judging from the direction it was flying, was it heading towards him? There's nothing more to discuss. The enemy is already charging forward. At this point, he had only one choice: Justice Avengers, assemble. Chapter 429, Battle of Tiranport. The Avengers. This organization, invented by David, has now become a reality for various reasons. However, its membership is numerous and diverse, and everyone is from different worlds, so even those within it don't know who their teammates are. This time, the demonic attack allowed them to get to know each other. Speaking of demons, David saw that none of the superheroes questioned the idea of fighting demons, and he sighed again. Sure enough, choosing a path that is universally accepted was the right decision. Everyone believed that demons were evil. If David had not initially learned the holy light, but something that looked evil, or in most worlds was considered evil, he would have struggled to gather so many superheroes to help him. He would more likely be mistaken for a demon invading their world, and their friends would gather to defeat him. But because David chose the holy light, no one, after understanding its philosophy and nature, doubted his character. Even those unfamiliar with the holy light, seeing David shimmering in golden light and with wings on his back, wouldn't associate him with evil. Even if there were any misunderstandings, they would choose to engage in dialogue rather than engage in direct combat. David's inward sigh didn't prevent him from issuing a series of orders. He prioritized issuing a series of orders to Weatherby, ordering an evacuation alert for Port Tiran and evacuating civilians. He didn't rush to consider the specifics of how to engage. Present were tactical masters like Bruce Wayne, the Batman, and experienced frontline commander Steve Rogers. These two could easily devise the most appropriate plan for the moment. Megatron, continue monitoring the demon named Millard. Mage Gina Proudmoore, use teleportation to transport us to Port Tiran. Barry, Kara, you will ensure the safety of the civilians during the evacuation. The rest of you, prepare for battle. Ordinary soldiers wouldn't be useful in a battle like this, they would simply be tasked with protecting and directing the civilians to safety. Kara and Barry had no combat experience, and even with their powerful superpowers, they weren't suited to direct the front lines of the demonic battle. They would be better off performing simple support duties. As Steve assigned everyone their tasks, everyone began to trickle out of the conference room. Gina Proudmoore hadn't been called to the meeting initially, but she was always consulted when quick movement was needed. It was a shame Ronan had gone south with the Knights of Tiran, otherwise, the mage would have been incredibly useful against the demons. Floyd returned to the barracks to assemble the Winter Knights. This was their first battle since their entire force had been transformed into paladins. Floyd hadn't expected the Winter Knights' first battle after becoming fully formed would be against demons. It was a formidable challenge, but it also presented a perfect opportunity to prove that the Winter Knights were Winterfell's ultimate force. Optimus Prime called for an ambulance. Currently, only he, Megatron, and Ambulance possessed the power of the Holy Light. Megatron would remain in the air and would not directly participate in the battle against the demons. The ambulance would be dispatched to the battlefield to ensure that those injured, including civilians, received prompt medical treatment. Just as David was changing into his Lightbringer suit, Bruce and Steve approached him. Demons can be resurrected through the island's resurrection pool, right? Yes, everyone had seen this, and with a demonic battle imminent, Bruce certainly wouldn't overlook it. I'm wondering if that demon named Millard, after being stopped in Tiran Port, could continue to summon a steady stream of demons, launching endless attacks against us. Bruce considered this a significant possibility. He also considered the possibility that the demons might be able to use teleportation spells to quickly transport demons from the demon islands to the battlefield. After all, demons already possess the ability to teleport to other worlds, so it wouldn't be surprising for them to know how to teleport within their own world. Cast a spell to block magic? No, that's pointless. Bruce reasoned that a spell to block magic could only prevent teleportation within a certain area, but that could potentially allow the demons to attack other parts of the northern plains directly. It would be better to let them continue their attack on Tiran Port. Upon hearing this, David suddenly guessed Bruce's plan. Are you planning to launch a surprise attack on the demons' home base? The fact you asked that proves you've considered the feasibility of doing so. Bruce pondered over it, concluding that if he truly wanted to defeat or eliminate this group of demons, he had to destroy the resurrection pools on the demon islands beforehand. Otherwise, the demons would constantly resurrect, making it impossible to kill them all. This battle would be extremely difficult. Even if victory was ultimately achieved, it would likely be a Pyrrhic one. Who are you going to assign this task to? Me. David looked at Steve Rogers before him and realized that Captain America was the perfect fit. He possessed a powerful holy light, extensive experience in special operations behind enemy lines, and had served as the Sorcerer Supreme, having dealt with creatures similar to demons. More importantly, the resurrection pools used by the demons were likely some kind of mystical power. Steve, having been forced to learn a great deal of mystical knowledge during his time as the Sorcerer Supreme, should know how to completely destroy it. I thought you'd send Clark or me. From what you've revealed, these demons are very skilled in mind control and other spells. I'm not sure if Clark can handle that right now, so he's not suited for this. Bruce considered everything carefully, especially after reading a lot of comics. As for you, I think with you in charge of Port Tiran, even if Steve can't destroy the resurrection pool, we can still defeat the demons. Bruce never had a firm idea of David's true combat prowess. But from what he'd heard from Sylvanus, Gina, Steve, Clark, Tony, and others, he was incredibly powerful. However, what Bruce valued most was that as long as David was on the battlefield, no casualties would befall his side. In a sense, David was Winterfell's resurrection pool. Even though the Knights of Winterfell were now all paladins and the Cathedral of Light had a number of priests, and even Optimus Prime and Ratchet possessed impressive light attainments, they still couldn't replace David's importance. Steve, are you going alone? How could that be? Steve said, his expression akin to, I'm not going to die. Diana, Arthur, and Tony will be with me. I see. Each of them possessed formidable individual abilities, and possessed some mystical powers. This showed that this team had been carefully selected. Good luck to you. While the three men were talking, everyone was already preparing to depart. Everyone had gathered. Besides Optimus Prime and Ratchet, Several mass-produced Quinjet Decepticons were parked nearby. These fighters were a precaution. Regardless of their availability, having a few near the battlefield was far more convenient than having to dispatch them from Winterfell if needed. As Jaina's magical aura enveloped the area, everyone regained their sight and arrived at the docks of Port Tiran. This newly established port city wasn't very large, but its public facilities were already complete. A piercing blare of alarms blared from the city's loudspeakers. Local officials, police, and soldiers stationed at Port Tiran, already notified, were organizing the orderly evacuation of civilians. David glanced around, using his senses to confirm that no unfortunate souls had been left behind. He then glanced at the dock, which was only occupied by a few fishing boats. While they might not be of much use, having a few warships anchored at the harbor would make it look much more impressive. Just as everyone took their positions, finding a suitable position to engage the enemy, Megatron's voice rang out over the public channel. The enemy has noticed your presence. The demon named Millard has summoned at least 500 demons. After hearing Megatron's report, David and Bruce exchanged a glance. It was clear that Bruce's earlier assessment had been correct. Prepare to meet the enemy. The 80 Winter Knights standing behind David, several of whom had transformed missile launchers from their shoulders, loaded with Jericho missiles imbued with holy light. The target is within range. Floyd listened to his men's report, glanced at David, and seeing His Majesty nod, he immediately ordered, fire. With a command, several Jericho missiles flew off into the distance. Clark and Kara took advantage of the situation and flew into the air, observing the situation from afar. Boom! Countless explosions echoed almost simultaneously. Standing at the docks of Port Tiran, looking east, the sea and sky became a vast ball of light. The next second, a strong wind with the smell of seawater swept over everyone, but no one tried to hide or blink, their eyes widening as they stared into the distance, eager to see the effectiveness of the attack. Not bad. David, who had the strongest perception, knew the result before anyone else. This missile attack killed many demons, and the rest suffered some injuries. Only Millard remained unscathed. Looks like I'll have to personally take on this demon leader. Leave this demon to me. Optimus Prime's modified car appeared out of thin air and combined with Optimus Prime to transform into the even taller Super Optimus Prime. Autobots, attack. Chapter 430 I am already invincible. Flesh and blood flew everywhere, roars of despair raged, lives sacrificed, none of that was happening. By the time the demon horde officially landed at Tiran Harbor, the demons, having endured several rounds of missile fire, were already suffering heavy damage. Millard, the massive demon, hadn't suffered much damage, but the continuous explosions of holy light had taken their toll. By the time he reached the shore, his vision hadn't fully recovered, and only with a heartfelt punch from Optimus Prime did he recover. As for the other demons, less than half had made it to shore. After another round of relentless bombardment by the Winter Knights, while casualties were few, nearly all were wounded. Piccolo assault rifles roared furiously, and the docks were instantly filled with the sound of gunfire and explosions. Amidst this cacophony, Captain Carter, Floyd, Clark, and the others charged into the demon horde, slaughtering them relentlessly. David glanced at Zod and waved his hand to Zod beside him. In this situation, there's no need to leave any guards around. All Kryptonians can join the fight. Ratchet remained by David's side, unmoved. Barry, the Flash, quickly surveyed the area surrounding Port Tiran. After ensuring the civilians weren't under attack, he began roaming the battlefield, bringing injured teammates to Ratchet's side. However, he realized his need to save anyone was rare, if not non-existent. With the full ascension of the Winter Knights to Paladins, they gained the ability to heal with holy light. Even without specialization, it was sufficient at this point. Furthermore, when a Winter Knight's life was threatened, the Blizzard Power Armor's built-in first aid system would activate. A few potions would instantly restore their combat effectiveness. If their condition remained low, a few more healing spells wouldn't be too much of a hassle. It seems, these demons won't pose much of a problem for us. Liadrin, the Bishop of the Cathedral of Light, had also arrived, expecting to showcase her training achievements before David. However, like Ratchet, she had no chance to intervene and stood beside His Majesty, David, to watch the action unfold. If I'm not mistaken, the second wave of demons should be appearing. This wasn't a game. Millard didn't need to wait until all his men were dead before summoning a second wave. Even though he was locked in a fierce duel with Optimus Prime, It didn't stop him from using his teleportation spell to summon a new wave of demons to join the battle. David didn't know how many of the second wave were resurrected from previously killed demons, but this confirmed Bruce's earlier concerns. If the resurrection pool wasn't destroyed, these demons would be impossible to annihilate completely. Under normal circumstances, they wouldn't be able to withstand such a relentless attack. As Steve set off, Blink is also in that group. Blink will be in charge of opening the portal to help them reach the Demon Islands soon. Kamartaj's teleportation spell wasn't working in this world yet, and Steve had been primarily researching how to solve this problem. However, before he could overcome this problem, the demonic attack occurred. As for Blink and Winterfell, the fact that her abilities hadn't been fully developed wasn't a problem. For interplanetary travel, Blink's current abilities were more than sufficient. Even if she couldn't open a portal directly to the Demon Islands, she could simply open it a few more times. David surveyed the battle ahead and instructed Megatron, head above the Demon Islands and await my orders. Understood. Megatron didn't ask David why he was going above the Demon Islands. Now that David had proven himself an exceptional Cybertronian leader and was gradually leading Cybertron back to health, Megatron wouldn't question the core instructions emanating from the L-Spark. After giving the order, David considered whether to make a minor display of his presence. Perhaps grant everyone a collective buff or something? Acting immediately, David raised his hand, preparing to unleash a beam of holy light, just as he had previously unleashed the holy light field. However, his current strength was countless levels higher, and he had already grasped his own situation. So, before he could even raise his arm, the mere thought arose, and the sky around Port Tiran was already stained with a rich golden hue. The clouds in the sky parted, and a beam of light shone down, enveloping David. The next second, countless pure white feathers, each condensed from holy light, appeared from nowhere. These feathers seemed harmless, but any demon that touched them would be instantly burned by the holy fire. For the Winter City's forces, however, these feathers caused no harm at all, only a sense of comfort. As for the Winter Knights, the feathers' benefits were even more pronounced. Almost as soon as the feathers appeared between heaven and earth, each Winter Knight unfurled a pair of wings shrouded in holy light. The knights felt their strength, speed, and reflexes dramatically increased. The holy light within them seemed boundless, allowing them to completely disregard its consumption, imbuing each attack with a flood of holy light. In this state, the Piccolo assault rifle was coated in a layer of light, the flames from its muzzle transformed into holy light, and the bullets fired were similarly bathed in rich holy light, drawing streaks of golden light across the battlefield. After unleashing a massive area of effect buff, he continued to stand still and gaze upon the battlefield. Although he was now incredibly conspicuous, the brightest figure on the battlefield of Port Tiran, he was also the demon leader Millard's true target. But the demon, locked in combat with Optimus Prime, had no time to attack the human. Even when he exerted all his might to send the metal creature flying, it charged forward again as if nothing had happened. This was what frustrated Millard most. His attacks seemed powerless to harm the creature. Its energy shield was so formidable that it sometimes even withstood his attacks, simply to attack him more effectively. Why is there such powerful mechanical life on the continent of Brunia? No one answered Millard's question, and the demon couldn't ask for details. Combined with the immense energy released by the human named David, Millard realized he had made the same mistake as Norma. Even though he had overestimated the human strength, he had still underestimated his power. Not only the human strength, but also the power of his subordinates. The demons had no advantage against the human army. These humans' combat power had already exceeded the upper limit set by the Master for this continent. No wonder the Master suddenly ordered him to investigate the human situation. I thought that if I personally took action, all problems would be solved. But I didn't expect this situation to escalate into this. My demons were being slaughtered by humans, and even I couldn't actually get close to my target, only watching from afar. I had to think of a way. Millard's gaze quickly swept across the battlefield, quickly focusing on the most conspicuous group on the battlefield, the Kryptonians. If physical attacks don't work, then try psychological tactics. Millard's eyes suddenly glowed an eerie red, but just as they lit up, a huge warning surged within him. Instinct forced him to dodge to the side, but it was useless. An immensely thick, condensed column of sacred fire descended from the void, a terrifying pillar over 10 meters in diameter that illuminated nearly the entire area in a blaze. On the battlefield, there was no distinction between friend and foe. In that moment, It was as if everyone lost their sight, seeing only a vast expanse of white. A violent, scorching blast of air swept over them, sending everyone stumbling. This was still a good thing, as they were all friendly. The paladins caught in the blast even felt a surge of holy light within them. As for the demons, those close were instantly vaporized, while those further away were severely wounded, lying half dead on the ground. A single strike from those around them would add another kill to their tally. With those further away already suffering, one could imagine the situation for Millard, the direct target. He couldn't care less about psychological warfare, all he wanted now was to escape. What kind of terrifying being was this? For a moment, he felt as if he were facing his master. Millard was certain this was no enemy he could handle. Such a powerful being had appeared on the Bronia continent, he had to report this to his master. Unwilling to fight any further, Millard turned and prepared to flee. Even though half his body had been charred and billowing white smoke, it didn't slow him down at all, and he instantly leaped hundreds of meters. Optimus Prime wanted to give chase, but speed wasn't his strong point. Moreover, without the fusion of Skyfire and the ability to fly, he felt awkward standing on the beach. Clark and Zod reacted the fastest and rushed out, but they had barely made it 10 meters when a massive column of fire descended from the sky in the distance, completely engulfing Millard. When the flames dissipated, so did Millard. "He's dead." Bruce Wayne, who had been watching the whole thing from David's side, adjusted his sunglasses, which he had slipped on at some point. "No." David curled his lips. "He got away." He suddenly realized that Millard had been killed intentionally. His soul teleported away the moment he died. Back to the Demon Islands. No. David looked up at the sky, certain that Millard's soul had teleported directly outside of Bronia. Probably to find his master. David, however, had sent the other demons back to the resurrection pools, which might have kept Steve busy. However, compared to this little thing, David was concerned about another thing. Can I defeat those gods with my current strength? Chapter 431. I am looking up. David looked up at the sky. He had no idea how powerful those gods truly were, and he felt no elation at his easy slaying of the demon leader. He was merely a subordinate of the mastermind, and his goal was to defeat him. Killing him, a mere pawn, wasn't worth celebrating. David's terrifying display of strength had shocked some. Bruce Wayne gently adjusted his sunglasses. He had already overestimated David's strength, but now it seemed he still had no idea of his true capabilities. He had witnessed a previous battle between the demon leader, Millard, and Optimus Prime. Millard was incredibly powerful. While he couldn't defeat Optimus Prime didn't have much of an advantage. He was a super Optimus Prime, having mastered the Holy Light and enhanced with Cybertron fusion technology. Bruce considered this Optimus Prime to be quite formidable, yet he could only maintain a stalemate with a demon. Even such a formidable demon couldn't withstand even a casual blow from David. Can Clark stand up to David? Bruce knew the answer without even needing to think. Clark couldn't possibly be David's match. He'd seen Clark's performance. While he could move freely among the demons, easily slaying them, he was still a far cry from David. They weren't even on the same level. Perhaps given enough time, Clark could grow to that level of strength, but how much stronger would David be by then? He couldn't assume David's strength had peaked, unable to improve any further, could he? Bruce was thankful. Although David sometimes appeared frivolous and fond of watching the fun, he was generally a strong man of integrity, kindness, and a commitment to order. Or perhaps, a true god. He wouldn't abuse his power to do whatever he wanted, bully the weak, or exploit the weak for his own selfish desires. Winter City, founded by David, might appear to be a backward, feudal dictatorship, but its citizens were absolutely equal. They all followed the same laws, and no one enjoyed special treatment. Everyone had equal opportunities to work and earn a living, and there was no partiality in educational resources. According to David's plan for Winter City, even children from the most ordinary families could attend Winter Academy free of charge and receive the same education as children from aristocratic families. As long as their academic performance was excellent, their background wouldn't affect their future at all. Regardless of the future, at least Winter Kingdom was currently a happy and beautiful country, a dream for many. I'm so envious, Bruce sighed as the winter nights cleaned up the battlefield. The demon corpses were gathered and, after the ambulances had completed their sampling, they would be destroyed on site. These demon corpses carried corrosive energy and had to be disposed of as a precaution. Furthermore, the battle wasn't long, but the demon's destructive power was astonishing. Almost half of the docks at Port Tiran were destroyed, with additional damage caused by the Kryptonians and the Winter Knights. Not to mention the area where Optimus Prime and Millard fought. Perhaps a new dock could be built there. Zod, led by the Kryptonians, inspected themselves. Although it had been some time since Zod acquired his superpowers, and it had taken him considerable time to adjust to his new powers, this was his first time using them in combat. Zod and Fyra were satisfied with their performance, but also stunned by David's prowess. They both realized that David had shown some mercy when he dealt with them, otherwise the Kryptonians would have suffered a fate much worse than these demons. Under the pressure of such terrifying power, Zod had no desire to cause trouble. He simply served Winterfell and hoped David would keep his promise to provide a new home for the Kryptonians. Although Zod had adapted to life in Winterfell, rebuilding Krypton was a deep obsession that he would not give up easily. Meanwhile, Kara, not far away, ignored Barry's chatter and stared at her hands in wonder. After David released a vast expanse of holy light, she felt as if she had gained even greater strength, speed, and reflexes under its radiance. Whenever she and David basked in the sun together, she always felt as if she were being illuminated by two suns simultaneously. Now she finally understood why this had happened. It was all due to the mysterious power of the holy light. After David had unleashed such terrifying holy light, and after she had been bathed in its immense energy, Kara felt a strange shift taking place within her. Unsure, Kara glanced at the rebel nearby, then unleashed the heat ray. The originally red heat ray transformed into a golden beam, easily blasting the rock into dust. Ouch! Barry, who had been marveling at the king's terrifying power, was startled by Kara's sudden action. He also noticed the change in the color of the beam. Have you mastered the holy light? No, I'm just affected by it. Kara carefully felt it for a moment, then fired another heat ray at another rock. This time, the original red heat ray shattered it, but she realized the original red heat ray wasn't as powerful as the golden one. Interesting. Could it be that you absorbed David's holy light and stored it within you? Kara knew that Kryptonians could draw power from the yellow sun, but she had never imagined she could absorb the holy light herself. Or was it the holy light released by someone else? What kind of thing was this? Besides the yellow sun, could Kryptonians also draw energy from the minions? She wondered what was happening to Clark. Was he affected? Kara immediately flew to Clark's side and recounted her situation to her cousin. Is that the case? Clark glanced at his cousin, first closing his eyes to sense his own condition. Then, he too felt a slight shift in the energy within him. However, unlike Kara, he didn't notice any change in his own powers. This made Clark seriously suspect David had done something shady. Turning his head, he saw David standing still, not moving, not even glancing at Kara. Did he look like he was in a daze? Of course, David wasn't dazed. He was communicating with Megatron and Blink, checking in on Steve. After the Quinjet dropped Steve and the others off at the Devil's Islands, Blink opened a portal and sent them down below, while he remained aboard the Quinjet, ready to escort them to evacuation. Megatron, who had simultaneously moved over the Demon Islands, was also keeping a close eye on the situation. If necessary, he could deploy artillery support from the air. He could even outright destroy all islands with resurrection pools. This was David's reason for sending Megatron over. If Steve could destroy the resurrection pools, he would. If Steve couldn't, then Megatron would be responsible for violently destroying all islands with resurrection pools. How is it going? Pretty much going well. Steve was busy as he spoke to David over the comm device. His hands were constantly gesturing, channeling and combining holy light energy into magical runes and formations. He gently stomped his foot, and a temporary totem pole of earth elemental material rose from the ground nearby. The demons within range seemed to be mired in a quagmire, requiring increased effort to move normally. Aquaman Arthur, Wonder Woman Diana, and Tony Stark were wreaking havoc around Steve. Tony, besides unleashing various missiles, unleashed a volley of arcane missiles with a wave of his hand. Then let me confirm, can this resurrection pool be destroyed physically? Wait a minute. Steve carefully observed and analyzed the pool's composition and energy flow, quickly reaching a basic conclusion. Theoretically, it can be completely destroyed physically, but it needs to be very thorough. Then I'm relieved. Keep going. If the situation gets too critical, just ask Megatron for help. Steve's words reassured David. Since it could be physically destroyed, he wouldn't have to make a special trip. By the way, if possible, write down the detailed structure of the resurrection pool. I'm doing that. You really understand me. Satisfied, David disconnected the call. He no longer needed to worry about the demon islands. Steve would take care of everything. Glancing at the people around him, David felt a sense of relief. Finally, I've made it this far. There shouldn't be any force on Bronya that could threaten him and Winterfell. Even if it came in large numbers, Optimus Prime, Steve, Clark, and the others could handle it. As a king, he only needs to stay quietly in the castle, and occasionally show off with his army. When facing other forces in this world, his army has an absolutely crushing force, and he does not have to worry about being defeated by other forces. Next, after Steve brings back the structure of the resurrection pool used by the demons, David will see if he can replicate a Holy Light version. If successful, the last important piece of the puzzle among his many ideas will be in place. What else can I do next? David thought about it, and it seemed that the only thing he could do was to watch the situation unfold and Winter City unified Bronya. Or, find a chance to go outside and explore the situation? As soon as this idea came up, David could hardly control his restless heart. After all, his current strength has become very strong, and he has a lot of life-saving trump cards, which is very suitable for going out and having some fun. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 432 Above the Moon. After clearing the battlefield, Jaina cast another teleportation spell, bringing everyone back to Winterfell. Although the docks at Tiran Port were damaged in the battle, repairs were handled by Tiran Port's artisans, and it was definitely not the knights and superheroes' turn to repair them. Fortunately, the battle didn't cause further damage. Tiran Port's vital facilities and residential areas were spared, and after a brief period of refuge, the residents of Tiran Port were able to return to their homes and resume their previous lives. However, the garrison at Tiran Port should indeed be strengthened. Even if the demonic threat was averted, the possibility of the Thordarimir Empire or the Orcs advancing north along the coastline, or another continent attacking the northern plains across the sea, remained. In either case, Tiran Port would become a battlefield. Perhaps Skyfire should be stationed there to garrison? Meanwhile, a few more mass-produced Decepticon speedboats could be built, and Lightning and Shatter could be transferred from Snaufforest to Tiran Port. Snaufort would serve as a transit point for the northern plains, but it would no longer house a large military presence. After all, Snaufort was no longer a frontier fortress for the Kingdom of Winter. After issuing a few orders, David thanked each of the many superheroes and friends who had helped him. Those who had merely visited, like Barry, but had run into trouble and offered their assistance, naturally needed to be thanked. Jaina, who was merely a representative of Kultiris and was staying in Winter City, also deserved a thank you. David also remembered Clark and Kara, who had already settled in Winter City. Floyd didn't need to be thanked. David immediately praised the entire Winter Knights. It was clear that even a mere verbal compliment from His Majesty had delighted the members of the Winter Knights. They all felt that their years of hard work had paid off. They had proven themselves worthy of His Majesty's attention and the generous treatment he had bestowed upon them. After completing his rounds, David inquired about Steve's situation. He learned that Steve had nearly destroyed the resurrection pool and had been flash-fed to the Quinjet. Next, it was Megatron's turn to perform. Using the aerospace carrier blueprints obtained from the Marvel Universe, Tony Stark refined them, incorporating much of the end of Marvel Universe civilizations and Cybertron technology. The Megatron, Winter City's first helicarrier, bared its ferocious fangs for the first time. Countless ground-to-ground weapons rained down their munitions on the Demon Islands. Beams, live rounds, and missiles blasted every inch of the islands. By the time the smoke cleared, no demons remained. To ensure nothing would go wrong, Megatron wouldn't immediately return to the skies above the northern plains. Instead, he would continue patrolling the area, ensuring the demons were completely annihilated. However, Steve, Tony, Diana, Arthur, and the others were able to return immediately, and they did so quite quickly. Thanks to Clarice, although he used Flash as his code name during operations, Steve usually called them by their names, just as he wouldn't call Tony Iron Man. I only helped a little. Clarice didn't think her contribution was significant. After all, it was these few who fought the entire horde of demons, while Steve was responsible for destroying the resurrection pool. Megatron was the final one to clear the area. Clarice's only responsibility was to open a few portals along the way, allowing everyone to reach their destination faster, then open portals to transport them to the surface, and finally open portals to ferry them back to the plane. Apart from these tasks, she mostly just stayed in the Quinjet and watched the action unfold. She didn't even have to pilot the plane. So, when Steve praised her, she felt quite embarrassed. It was mainly thanks to Steve, Diana, Arthur, and Tony. Okay, don't be so modest. If it weren't for you and me, we would have wasted quite a bit of time on the journey, Tony concluded, waving to the others as he prepared to leave. I know you're going to discuss the resurrection pool with Steve next, so I won't bother you. It seems your magic power is quite depleted. David had noticed earlier that Tony's arcane energy was being depleted, and he was anxious to return to meditation and replenish it. This is my first time using magic in such a high-intensity battle, and I haven't managed to control my mana consumption well. Tony rubbed his temple, feeling a slight headache. No more talk, I'm going back now. With that, he took off, heading towards Stark Manor. Diana and Arthur watched Tony fly away, and said goodbye to David one after another, asking where Bruce and Clark were. Either at Clark's house, or in a cafe. Do you know which cafe? I know, thanks. After confirming their whereabouts, Diana prepared to leave as well. However, Aquaman Arthur didn't want to go find Bruce and Clark. He wanted to explore Winterfell. He thought Diana would be a good guide and tried to convince her to show him around. Watching the two leave Castle Glamorgan, David invited Steve to join him in the tea room for a chat. He also invited Clarice. Want to come with me? You don't have anything to do back home, do you? Clarice thought for a few seconds and decided to leave. David and Steve looked like they were about to talk business. Why was she just hanging around? Before she could say anything, she saw Gwen approaching. Upon learning David and Steve were going to the tea room to discuss matters, she dragged Clarice along, intending to join the crowd. But after a while, she regretted her decision. Everything Steve said gave her a headache. It wasn't that she didn't understand, but rather that Gwen understood some of it, but without systematic training in magicraft, she was half comprehending. This was much more difficult than Clarice, who was completely lost beside her. Gwen was torn. Should I learn some magic? David couldn't pay attention to Gwen at the moment. He and Steve were discussing the possibility of modifying the demon's resurrection pool. After some discussion, they decided it was possible to create a resurrection stone powered by holy light. It just took time to work out the details. Let's take our time. There's nothing pressing to deal with in Winterfell right now. You don't have anything urgent to deal with, do you? David glanced at Steve. He had a lot of free time since he stopped being the Sorcerer Supreme. After whitewashing his Hydra unit into the Justice League, he suddenly became the most unburdened person in Winterfell, barely paying attention to events on his own world. According to him, matters within Earth were handled by the governments themselves, while the powerful cosmic enemies were handled by the god King Odin. After Hydra became the Justice League, there was simply no work to attend to. Consequently, many former Hydra and current Justice League members simply piloted Tony Stark's spaceships and ventured into the universe. After seeing the vastness of the skies, these individuals lost interest in navigating Earth. So, you have nothing to do now, almost, then this difficult task is left to you. Steve was speechless. He thought that he had copied the structure of the resurrection pool. Even if the task was completed, David would be responsible for resurrecting the steel himself. Then what are you going to do? I'm thinking of going over there to take a look. Over there? Steve was stunned for a few seconds before reacting. Are you confident in fighting against those gods? Confidence? I haven't really seen those guys. I don't know how strong they are, so what's the confidence? David briefly stated his thoughts. So, I plan to test it first to see what level the strength of these gods has reached. Is it too dangerous? Maybe. David glanced at Gwen, whose face revealed some worry, but sometimes you still need to take some risks. Don't worry, I have enough life-saving props on me. Why not wait until the resurrection steel is built before checking the situation of those gods? No need. Brunia is my resurrection steel. The resurrection steel that David wants to build cannot be his own resurrection point. His own level is too high, beyond the limit of that prop. But it wasn't as if David had no resurrection point. After all, he was Brunia, and unless Brunia was completely destroyed, he wouldn't be so easily dead. Steve waited until David and Gwen had explained enough before continuing. Since we're going to investigate those gods, do you know where we should start? Of course. David turned and looked out the window. Night had already enveloped Winter City, and the full moon was very conspicuous. Steve, Gwen, and Clarice followed David's gaze and immediately noticed a full moon hanging high in the night sky. The moon? Steve looked surprised. Could it be that the gods lived on the moon? Are those gods there? I don't know if those so-called gods are there. I only know that after I killed that demon leader, Millard, his soul was transported there. David felt that even if the gods weren't on the moon, it must contain important clues. How are you going to get up there? Steve glanced at the moon again. The moon here looked a lot like the Earth's, sometimes making him forget he wasn't on Earth. Or, how are you going to avoid the surveillance from the sky? I'm going to learn stealth. Learn now. Yes, David touched his chin. He felt that with his talent, learning stealth shouldn't be difficult. Maybe I can even master shadow energy. Chapter 433 How many dreams are flying freely? Stealth, the most prominent skill of Azulf's rogues and assassins, is the ability to conceal oneself between the shadow realm and the real world. Caught between these two worlds, rogues and assassins exist somewhere between visible and invisible, but there are numerous means to break this state, allowing those who have been hidden to reappear. Strictly speaking, it's not a spell, and the learning difficulty isn't particularly high. However, the risk of using this ability is incredibly high, and it's virtually ineffective against enemies with high perception. This is why most spellcasters dismiss it as a skill. They have too many alternatives to put themselves in such a dangerous position. For the formidable David, learning stealth was a piece of cake. Gwen explained the key points of stealth, and David was able to use it correctly. As for harnessing shadow energy, that's not the case. While stealth is related to the shadow realm, it has little to do with it. But, a holy light priest using stealth to bring himself so close to the shadow realm feels strange. It felt strange, as if he could turn against the holy light at any moment. The question arose, what would happen if David, revered as the incarnation of holy light, even the Lord of Light, rebelled against it? Would he become the Lord of Shadow? Would he even have to face off against the Lord of the Void to determine who was superior? David, his mind racing with thoughts, turned to find Gwen, after giving him instructions, now teaching Clarice how to use stealth. Clarice was a natural at this, quickly grasping the key in entering stealth. However, her stealth wasn't perfect yet. She was only translucent, still visible, and her silhouette would become even clearer the moment she started moving. Just keep practicing, this was normal. Practice would eventually lead to mastery. Gwen relied on the Black Venom Queen suit to perfectly enter stealth and move at normal speed. Without it, she had to move cautiously in stealth, preferably in dark corners and avoiding open spaces and direct sunlight. As for David, he discovered that even he could only move at the speed of a normal walk after entering stealth. Any faster would cause him to be thrown out of stealth. This wasn't a problem with his own strength, but rather the unique nature of the skill. While in stealth, it felt like the real world was on one side, and the shadow world on the right. One had to carefully approach the shadow world, yet couldn't completely escape it, ensuring they could return at any time. The constant, irregular fluctuations between the two worlds forced the user to carefully control their position, making fast movement impossible. After watching Clarice and Gwen playfully practicing for a while, David left the practice room. He had come out because he sensed someone familiar had returned. Have you finished defeating the Lich King? Aedan, standing before him, was dressed in full armor of the Knights of the Silver Hand, a long sword slung at his waist, and a large bag in hand. He looked like he'd just moved, or returned from a trip, a satisfied smile on his face. The Lich King, Ner'zhul, has been slain. The remaining tasks are just loose ends, which the Alliance's ordinary soldiers will handle. I'm returning early. Ever since the Kingdom of Tiran spearheaded the coalition and decided to march north to Northrend to defeat the Lich King, Aedan has resided permanently in Azeroth. Having overcome Diablo's threat, awakened his Nephilim bloodline without the suppression of the Worldstone, and been able to level up and learn various arcane knowledge in Winterfell, Aedan's combat effectiveness has skyrocketed. Now, Aedan is not only a formidable warrior proficient in various weaponry and close-quarters combat, but also possesses extensive knowledge of arcane magic and the ranger's archery skills. It's safe to say that there's nothing Aedan can't learn, unless he's unwilling to do so. For such a skilled warrior, teaming up with paladins like Fordring and Mograine to defeat the Icy Lich King, the outcome was a foregone conclusion. After the great battle with this Ner'zhul, I've also confirmed one thing. What? My current strength is far from enough to solve the problems in Sanctuary. As a hero who had saved Sanctuary, Aedan, After understanding the true situation of his own world, had been pondering what he could do to truly save it. Heaven, hell, angels, demons. None of them were easy to deal with. Even though he knew that destroying the World Stone would gradually restore humanity's strength, that only gave him the capital to fight against the two major forces. Besides, the Nephilim also needed time to grow. To truly defeat them, he needed even greater strength. If only the dungeons could have higher difficulty levels. Aedon carried his luggage back to Castle Glamorgan, hoping to continue his work as a dungeon keeper, so he could train more frequently. Even at Hell's difficulty, Aedon's strength wouldn't increase much. But as long as he could, he was willing to keep grinding. As a warrior, he had no shortage of mental fortitude. At most, it would take a few decades. Being in Winter City, Aedon wasn't worried about his lifespan. He wanted to see if this dungeon had any limits. Go for it. After hearing Aedon's decision, David could only offer his support. Keep up the good work. Then, something else occurred to him. Fort Glamorgan was going to be renovated soon. Since the new building would occupy a larger area, the surrounding garages, training rooms, and other structures might also need to be relocated. They could either be moved north or incorporated directly into the new Fort Glamorgan. The details would have to wait for Edwin Van Cleef's designs. In either case, the dungeon would have to be moved ahead of time. I see. Learning that Fort Glamorgan was about to undergo a massive reconstruction project, David suggested moving the dungeon to the military barracks. Putting it in the Winter Knights' quarters would allow them to continue to grow stronger. That's a good idea indeed. The people of Fort Glamorgan didn't use the dungeon much these days. Especially after using the strengthening potions, the dungeon had become a place to simply pass the time. After so much time spent grinding, everyone was getting a little tired. After all, the people around David weren't true warriors, so they didn't have that strong drive to become stronger. Instead of leaving it there, it would be better to open it up to the Winter Knights. This way, the Winter Knights could continue to grow stronger, Winter City could continue to gain access to the dungeon's resources, and the dungeon wouldn't be left empty. Even if David, Helen, Gwen, or the others suddenly wanted to go dungeon drilling, going to the winter barracks wouldn't be too much of a hassle. I heard Steve say you were planning to go out and investigate the situation yourself. Aedon didn't rush to put his luggage away, but simply stood there and chatted with David. Do you need any help? If you do, I won't hesitate. He had already told Steve, Tony, Clark, and the others that this kind of stealth exploration was safer to do alone. He had a plethora of life-saving tricks, so if things didn't work out, he could just use his invincible Hearthstone and run back to Brunia. Even if his invincibility wasn't truly invincible against a truly powerful opponent, holding on for a few seconds until the Hearthstone activated shouldn't be a problem. The real concern was the inability to use the Hearthstone. While David, being Brunia himself, wouldn't be killed unless Brunia was destroyed, he didn't know what the situation would be like. To avoid worrying everyone, he kept this a secret. After speaking with Aedon, David checked on the situation of the Winter Army. Dragon Keep had been captured, and the entire family of the rebel leader, Marcus Ingram Fable, had been slain. Currently, the Winter Army was mopping up the remaining enemies while resting within Dragon Keep, observing any potential local forces that might revolt. So far, the local nobles of Dragon Keep have shown no intention of continuing to fight the Kingdom of Winter. It's unclear whether the Winter Army's terrifying power has intimidated them, or whether Cephius' presence at the front lines had an unexpected effect. Overall, the eastern part of the Kingdom of Winter has stabilized. It remains to be seen whether David will appoint a new Lord Marcus to guard Dragon Keep, or if he has other plans. In either case, the military had no business. The Winter Army would leave a few soldiers to defend Dragon Keep while continuing their sweep of other areas. After reviewing the report and confirming that Weatherby was already discussing with his men how to take over Dragon Keep's administrative duties, and that King David didn't need to worry about such trivial matters, David began his routine equipment check. Whenever he left his house, he would check his gear to ensure he hadn't left anything important behind. Even if he did, returning to retrieve it wouldn't be difficult, so he still did. His multi-tool, now the size of a warehouse, contained his Mustang sports car, Durandal fighter, Sea King's spear, hammer of judgment, light hunter pistol, and ammunition. David also stowed a miscellaneous item, including Northwind light armor and heavy cavalry systems. After completing his check, David looked up to see Laura, Helen, Gwen, and Eva standing nearby, staring at him. Are you here to see me off? Yes, Laura pinched her waist, without making any jokes, but solemnly asked David, "Come back safely." "I will." He stood up and hugged Laura, then hugged Helen, Gwen and Eva respectively, and finally reminded Laura, "Don't tell Sophia about this, okay?" Without saying anything else, they went to the roof together and watched David soar into the sky. Chapter 434 Yenera Continent. Wow, it feels like a fragrance all the way. David, humming a tune, quickly passed through the clouds, surveying the boundless, limitless landscape above the sea of clouds. He didn't rush to higher ground, but instead slightly adjusted his direction, rapidly approaching the moon. His speed was rapid, and he soon reached his designated location, reaching the edge of a safe altitude. Though he couldn't see, David could sense that if he flew another 10 meters up, he would pass through a protective layer and reach the outer reaches of Brunia. Stealth. His figure instantly vanished, and David transformed into a Cybertronian body. His daily analysis of the folding crystal hadn't been in vain. David's Cybertronian body was also coated with folding crystal, ensuring that even if he revealed even the slightest flaw while stealthily moving, it wouldn't be immediately detected by any detection device or ability. He wasn't sure if this would work, but he had everything in place. If he were still discovered in this situation, it would at least prove that all of Winter City's current concealment and anti-detection capabilities were ineffective against the enemy. Until they achieved a greater breakthrough, they could consider refraining from further exploration. After completing all preparations, David soared upward once more, quickly crossing the safety line. He felt nothing special, but once he emerged from Brunia, he could clearly see a translucent energy barrier beneath, protecting the entire planet. This energy also blocked outside observation. While he could clearly see the planet's appearance, when David tried to examine more details, he found his vision was completely unable to penetrate the energy barrier. This doesn't seem good. In theory, this energy belonged to him, even though he couldn't use it right now. But didn't this situation prove that his current strength wasn't as high as it could be? If Brunia, possessing such immense power, could only use such passive means to protect itself, how powerful could the invading enemy be? Should I go back? A thought of retreat crept into David's mind, but he decided to put it aside and continue cautiously approaching the moon. After a slow flight, confirming he hadn't been detected, David began to accelerate, simultaneously maximizing his senses and constantly observing his surroundings. No spaceships, space stations, fortresses, or anything like that. He also found no powerful life forms. After searching around, David found the area surrounding Brunia to be remarkably clean, without the expected large military presence or surrounding structures. Within a considerable distance, the moon was the only celestial body. Although it looked very similar to Earth's moon when I was on the ground, now that I see it up close, it's exactly the same, isn't it? After a period of trial and error, David finally discovered the difference between this moon and Earth's. It was man-made. Using teleportation, he successfully entered. Looking at the sci-fi-inspired metal structures around him, David carefully examined the situation. David casually wandered around, stealth and invisibility disabled. After wandering for a long time, he quickly found an area where a large number of life forms gathered. Upon entering, he discovered that it was like a well-equipped sci-fi city. There were a large number of people here. Though all were handsome men and beautiful women, and all had youthful appearances, they looked no different from humans. After David regained his human form, he easily blended into the crowd and stole a wealth of information from their devices. These people were an expeditionary force from the Sarkhan Empire. This artificial moon was actually a forward outpost. Their primary purpose was to prevent the birth of Brunia, because, to the people of the Sarkhan Empire, such cosmic life forms were considered the most evil. David read the brief history of the Sarkhan Empire. It referred to life forms born from living planets as planetary spirits, classifying them as the most evil of cosmic life forms. These powerful planetary spirits had enslaved ordinary humans for years. The Sarkhan Empire was founded by humans who rose up against the oppressive rule of the planetary spirits. After successfully overthrowing the first planetary spirit that enslaved them, the Sarkhan Empire embarked on a great path of expansion throughout the universe, slaughtering any planetary life forms that might give rise to gods. It's said that the Sarkhan Empire has successfully cleansed over 1,000 planets. Brunia is just one of countless worlds conquered by the Sarkhan Empire. David scratched his cheek speechlessly. He'd gone from a pitiful victim of justice to a villain everyone hated. What kind of a reversal? And you, the Sarkhan Empire, rebelled against tyranny, only to turn around and wreak havoc on the races of other planets. Aren't you the true planetary evil spirits? Huh? No. David suddenly realized that it was hard to say how many of the many races on Brennio were indigenous. Dark elves, humans, and orcs, for example, had already been confirmed to have been sent there by these creatures. Perhaps, in the eyes of the Sarkhan Empire, those civilized races were merely tools, and therefore shouldn't be treated as equals? After reviewing public information and online chat posts and conversations, David discovered that the Sarkhan Empire had indeed discussed this issue. Some believe that treating intelligent life created using life creation technology in this way was immoral and uncivilized, and that such behavior should be stopped. But many were dismissive. Most people in the Sarkhan Empire didn't consider primitive life forms with low intelligence, fragile bodies, short lifespans, and minimal civilization to be intelligent species comparable to themselves. David watched the debate for a while, becoming increasingly captivated. The two sides shifted from elegantly presented facts and reasoning to cordially greeting each other's ancestors, the transitions flowing smoothly and naturally. Intrigued, David took a look at the deleted content during the debate and came across some interesting details. Operation Archaeologist, Artificial Protist Project, Unella Continent. Following these keywords, David realized that to access the relevant information, he would need to hack into a higher-level server, which might trigger an alarm. After mentally assessing the situation, David didn't rush to steal the data, but instead searched for information related to Millard. He discovered that Millard's information also pointed to the Unella continent. He also learned that the senior commander of this outpost seemed to be on the Unella continent. The continent of Yanara? Could it be that continent on the other side of Brunnia that's making me feel so uneasy? David felt it was highly likely. It seemed the answer lay not in this lunar outpost, but on that continent itself. Finding a secluded corner, David slipped back into stealth mode. Following the outpost map he'd found earlier, he cautiously made his way to the military area and waited quietly, always passing through the gates when someone entered or left. Making his way smoothly to the computer room, David confirmed that Hearthstone was functioning properly before employing a relatively crude method to gain entry and steal the secret information. He'd expected some noise, but David successfully loaded the information and left the room safely, still unnoticed. David hadn't expected he had a natural talent for thievery. Of course, it could also be that the people at the outpost hadn't encountered anything in so long that they'd lost their usual vigilance. Anyway, confidential information was copied without triggering any alerts. Isn't that a pretty inadequate security measure? Crouching in a dark corner, David, still in stealth mode, flipped through the stolen data. His powerful Cybertronian body and immense mental strength allowed him to quickly locate the information he sought within the vast sea of data. He then realized why the data was so poorly secured. The outpost's senior commanders hadn't stored any crucial information in the confidential computer room database. For example, the Artificial Protist Project had no written records, only a minimal amount of information. Only those involved in the project knew its details. None of the personnel involved in the project were at the outpost. They were carrying out various missions on the continent of Yanara, advancing the plan. As for Operation Archaeologist, there were detailed details. David finally understood that Archaeologist wasn't a specific person or deity, but merely a code name. Furthermore, the commander of Operation Archaeologist was also on the continent of Yanara. Everything pointed to that location. It seemed they had to travel to Yanara for the true answers. Then let's go and take a look. David made the decision and began to act. He soon discovered that it was not an easy task to go to the continent of Yanara. His previous actions, coupled with Millard's report, aroused the vigilance of the Sakhan Empire. Now the continent of Yanara has been protected by the Sakhan Empire's special space vault technology. To enter it, one can only use the special teleportation equipment on the outpost. This is not a big deal for David, but the teleportation device will only be activated when necessary. David wasted a lot of time waiting for the right time. Fortunately, the result was good, and he successfully hitchhiked to the continent of Yanara. The first thing David did after arriving at his destination was to determine the condition of the Hearthstone. Oh, the Hearthstone doesn't work. Chapter 435 Archaeologist. Cautiously moving out from the pile of supplies, David quickly surveyed his surroundings. Farm? Warehouse. It was a seemingly ordinary, shabby farm. Several farmers, wielding crude farm tools, busied themselves in the modest fields. David looked around and was surprised to discover a valley. The only entrance was a narrow mountain path not far from where he was. From the shadows, he watched as a group of warmly dressed servants loaded the goods, recently brought from the warehouse, onto a cart and hauled them away. David decided to follow them, hoping they might find some useful clues. He wasn't worried about losing them, as there was only one way out of the valley. Following the path, David soon felt a chilly wind brush against his body. A little further, the wind was mixed with snowflakes. He now understood why these people were so heavily dressed. The temperature outside the valley was extremely cold. After walking for a full half hour, David finally emerged from the mountain path. He glanced at the main road before him, heading both uphill and downhill. The transporting team split in two, one heading up the mountain, the other heading down. David found a good viewpoint and surveyed the area below, then back up. He discovered he was slightly below the mountainside, where the peak soared into the sky, covered in vast expanses of snow. Only a short distance past the mountainside, on a platform, stood a castle. Those carrying goods up the mountain were likely heading for the castle. At the foot of the mountain lay a small town, its chimneys billowing with smoke, giving the town a vibrant atmosphere. Without much hesitation, David turned and headed up the mountain, figuring he'd find useful information faster by investigating the castle first. David's judgment proved accurate, for he'd unexpectedly run into an acquaintance the moment he arrived at the castle gate with the transport team. "Is that all?" "Yes." A brown-haired man in ornate full-body armor and a cloak surveyed the boxes on the wagon, silently counting them before waving to the leader of the convoy. "Just deliver them to the warehouse as usual." "Understood, sir." The leader waved to his men and then led the entire group toward a side door, where a dedicated passage to the warehouse was reserved for the servants. David didn't follow the transport convoy this time, his attention focused entirely on the armored man. Although he had never seen him before, he remembered his voice. Comparing his voice prints with it further confirmed his certainty. Wasn't this the orc god Archaeologist? From the information at the lunar outpost, David knew Archaeologist was merely a pseudonym, a code name, but there was always someone responsible. Especially since the man he'd previously contacted was likely Archaeologist's commander. Now, he had indeed encountered the real person, but he wondered what he was up to, dressed like this. He followed quietly, following Archaeologist all the way back to the castle, then wandered around with him for a moment. Luckily, the man didn't wander off and quickly returned to his room, shutting the door tightly before turning on his advanced equipment. "Wow. This damn place is freezing." Archaeologist casually tossed his cloak aside and poured himself a glass of wine, waiting for the temperature to rise. Just as he was about to take a sip to warm himself, he realized something was amiss. The heating system he'd installed in his room, while taking some time to heated up quickly, and should have warmed up by now. But the temperature didn't change much, the room remained cold and gloomy. Turning around, Archaeologist noticed someone standing behind him. His expression immediately changed, and he tossed his wine glass aside, preparing to draw his sword. Buzz! As Archaeologist drew his sword, he launched his attack. Gripping the hilt, he aimed the end at his foe, and a beam of light shot out at astonishing speed. Boom! The crimson beam struck David squarely in the face, but he remained unscathed, standing steady, gazing at the man across from him. "Finally, we meet, Archaeologist. Who are you?" Archaeologist frowned, studying the young man across from him, his mind racing with speculation about his identity. "Did someone plot this against me? They didn't even bother to give me a heads up." While Archaeologist was still cursing inwardly, David, realizing he hadn't recognized him at all and not interested in playing a game of guessing, promptly revealed the answer. "What? Don't you recognize me? I remember everything you said before." David spread his hands and reinforced the holy light surrounding the space. "This is my choice. Do you still think it's meaningless?" Archaeologist's face was confused at first, then filled with shock, and finally with disbelief. "Brenia, David watched the other man's expression change. He was surprised that after showing shock, Archaeologist, who had previously arrogantly threatened him, was now filled with fear. "Impossible. How could you be here?" "Why not?" To be honest, David was a little disappointed. He had thought Archaeologist was a big shot, but now it seemed he was no match for the assassin sent by the Templars. The sense of accomplishment he had to face was almost gone. He raised his chin slightly, and a pillar of fire descended from nowhere to hit Archaeologist. David didn't intend to kill him immediately, so he attacked cautiously, almost muttering gently under his breath. He somewhat underestimated Archaeologist's armor. This ornate full-body suit, though lacking any distinctive vibrations, possessed astonishing protective power. David's holy fire struck it, leaving only charred marks. Not only did it not damage the armor, it didn't even injure Arsagas himself. Nice armor, but that was all. David applied a little more force, and holy flames erupted from the ground, instantly crippling Arsagas's legs, leaving him lying helplessly on the ground at David's mercy. Although he had drawn his sword, Arsagas clearly lacked the strength to stand against David. Whether he held a weapon or not made no difference to David. Arsagas realized this, and though he held his sword, he didn't retaliate, despite its numerous traps. With a look of despair, Arsagas glanced around. The walls of his room glowed with a faint golden glow, evidently sealing the entire space with the enemy's power. Unable to escape or defeat, Arsagas was in despair, unsure of what else to do. A quick and decisive death seemed the best outcome for him. Kill me. Throwing his sword aside, Arsagas seemed to have given up. Had the man's eyes not been darting around, David might have believed him. I won't kill you, at least not now. Before he could finish his words, David saw a hint of joy on his face. Just as his mind wavered, David took a step forward, and the several meters between them vanished in an instant. In the blink of an eye, David was crouching beside Arsagas. I've understood this move a long time ago. But I've never used it before. I'll test it on you. Reaching out and lightly pressing his hand against Arsagas's forehead, a vast expanse of holy light emanated from his palm, instantly transforming Arsagas into a ball of light. Though he felt a flicker of resistance, his fragile willpower was no match for David's immense holy light. After a few breaths, as the light gradually faded, a brand new Arsagas emerged. His ornate armor was now embellished with golden lines, radiating a golden halo. Arsagas's once brown hair had turned a brilliant gold, and even his pupils had paled considerably, shimmering with holy light. Not only his appearance, but his aura had transformed dramatically. Arsagas had previously looked ordinary, even in his ornate armor, looking out of place. But now, even just standing there, Arsagas conveyed the feeling that this was what a knight should look like. How do you feel? Excellent, thank you, Lord. David stood up as he ceased radiating holy light, taking a few steps back to better observe the effects of the light forging. When the fully light-forged Arsagas stood before him, offering him immense respect, David had his answer. Stronger than I expected. Of course, this was a good thing for David at the moment. Arsagas, tell me everything you know. Focus on the continent of Anara and the artificial Protus project. David waved his hand to remove the surrounding restrictions, then walked to the side and comfortably poured himself a glass of wine. He didn't need to drink to warm himself up, he just wanted to drink something to taste a little bit. Anyway, no matter what kind of alcohol it was, it couldn't affect him. Wow, this wine is quite strong. Come to think of it, no matter how weak Arsagas was, he was still the commander of a high-level civilization. His own qualities could not be the same as those of ordinary people, so he didn't drink ordinary alcohol. Introduce the Sarkhan Empire in more detail. Yes, my lord. Chapter 436 Artificial Protus Project. The Sarkhan Empire began as a race native to a single planet, seemingly indistinguishable from Earthlings. The only difference was that the planet where the Sarkhan Empire was born housed a deity born from the planet itself. Titan, Celestial, Star Soul, or Protus? To the Sarkhan, whatever the name, it made no difference, for this deity was a mountain weighing down their heads, bound to eternal service. Day after day, year after year, the long years didn't wear down the Sarkhan's resolve, but instead strengthened their resolve to resist. Leveraging unique space technology, the Sarkhan continuously grew their strength in other worlds, hidden from their own deity's attention. They ultimately succeeded in slaying the planetary deity, removing the massive stone that had oppressed the Sarkhan for countless years. Though the sacrifice was immense, the Sarkhan were finally free. The planetary deity left a profound impression on the Sarkhan, and they could never forget the fear it inflicted. As they rapidly developed, they viewed this cosmic life, born from the living planet, as their greatest threat. With the establishment and expansion of the Sarkhan Empire, one life-bearing planet after another came into the Sarkhan Empire's sights. Some of these planets had yet to develop their own souls, while others had only just begun to develop rudimentary intelligence. Regardless, the Sarkhan would not sit idly by. After countless research and experiments, the Sarkhan had developed a method to combat the Protus, draining the energy of life-bearing planets for their own use, depriving them of the energy needed to mature into Protus. Thus, life-bearing planets took on a new meaning for the Sarkhan Empire, Energy. David curled his lips, knowing exactly what was going to happen. Of course, from the very beginning, the Sarkhan Empire had considered this kind of life as a mortal enemy, constantly hunting down and slaying them, while also profiting from it. It seemed no big deal. In short, the Sarkhan were exploring and developing across the universe, and Brunia was merely another planet among the countless planets the Sarkhan Empire was targeting. Whether it was the Azurgus campaign or the earlier campaign against the Dark Elves, these were fundamental operations that the Sarkhan Empire had proven over the years. By constantly purging intelligent life from planets, they disrupt their life cycle, preventing the birth of the Protoss. The crucial point is to completely eliminate intelligent life before it can establish a true symbiotic relationship with a planet. In other words, all intelligent life on the continent of Brunia is alien. Previous rounds of purges weren't particularly thorough, leaving some remnants. This was a key factor in the proposal for Operation Archaeologist. The bloodthirsty and aggressive orcs, combined with their all-destructive fell energy, could certainly carry out a complete cleansing of Brunia. David looked at Archaeologist before him and marveled at the ruthlessness of these Sarkhan. He also learned that Archaeologist's real name was Sadit, and Archaeologist was his code name. After arriving on the continent of Anara, he also adopted Archaeologist as his local name, so David didn't think it was wrong when he initially addressed him as Archaeologist. Archaeologist's role here was as the Lord of Everwinter. David didn't complain about the name, but raised his hand to signal Archaeologist to continue. Next came the topic he was most concerned about. The continent of Anara and the artificial Protoss project. To his surprise, this section wasn't long and was quickly concluded. The so-called continent of Anara was actually the Sarkhan Empire's stronghold on the planet of Brunia. Through years of construction, it had become a vast outpost and a key location for the artificial Protoss project. With the ability to draw energy from living planets and the technology acquired from numerous worlds, some within the Sarkhan Empire came up with the idea of creating their own Protoss. This would save the Sarkhan Empire from having to fight so ruthlessly against mature and powerful Protoss in the future. The specific steps involved, first, create a continent on a living planet. This continent would function as an energy harvester, capable of continuously drawing energy from the living planet. In a sense, everything on Anara, including the flowers, trees, snakes, insects, rats, ants, and various intelligent life forms, was truly native to Brunia, nurtured by Brunia's life force. Next, the most exceptional individuals from these countless native races will be selected and trained to become the chosen ones. Once they gain the world's recognition, the final step can begin. Become Brunia. The plan wasn't difficult to understand. David could explain it in 4 words: cuckoo in the magpie's nest. Besides me, there are several others in charge of this project. Each of us will be responsible for several candidates, guiding them towards our goal until the most outstanding one is selected. What will you guide these candidates to do? Continuously strengthen them, and earn their recognition on this continent. How will you do that? This continent has been specially designed. The continent of Yanara is a specially designed area. These specially trained and selected candidates all possess special qualifications. They can continuously grow stronger by killing monsters and completing various quests on this continent. David's eyes widened. What the hell, is this guy playing a game? As Archaeologist explained more, David thought this was a game. The candidates constantly battled, completed missions, and traveled across the continent, steadily increasing their strength and reputation, gradually approaching the standards required by the artificial Protoss project. With appropriate intervention from the project's guides, these candidates would periodically compete and even fight against each other. The winner would take everything from the other. The loser would be eliminated. They would constantly grow stronger, absorbing Brunia's energy, coupled with the recognition of the life forms bred by Brunia. They would gradually become recognized by Brunia itself. Hearing this, David had a strange sense of déjà vu. When only one candidate remained, this acclaimed hero would be transformed into true Brunia. That way, wouldn't that hero, upon learning the truth, turn against you, the masterminds? Just gaining recognition and the qualification to become a Brunia doesn't make that candidate a Brunia. Got it? Whether it was another cuckoo in the box scheme or using a device to drain the power from a hero and infuse it into another cloned body, the Sarkhan Empire had no shortage of the necessary technology. In short, the Sarkhan Empire possesses considerable experience and a wealth of methods for dealing with the Protoss. Finally, after requesting the list of candidates he was tasked with guiding from Archaeologist, David posed the crucial question: will destroying the continent of Anara mean the plan can't proceed? Of course, but Arsagas's subsequent words startled David. While the direct destruction of Anara would certainly thwart the Sarkhan Empire's plan to create Protoss, it would also inflict immense damage on the planet of Brunia itself. At best, the planet would suffer irreversible damage, degrading from a life-bearing planet to a severely damaged rocky one. At worst, the entire planet could be destroyed. The Sarkhan Empire would undoubtedly consider this a minor issue, but David couldn't accept such an outcome. Having determined that brute force was unacceptable and could only be used as a last resort in an emergency, David double-checked that he hadn't forgotten anything before issuing Arsagas his final order. Suicide. Arsagas, boom. Arsagas obeyed perfectly, transforming himself into holy light and self-destructing, dissolving into tiny dots of golden light that filled the room. His soul was completely destroyed, and not even David could resurrect it. As for why he allowed such a loyal little brother to commit suicide? Although Arsagas had been line-forged and appeared loyal, David never believed this kind of brainwashing was unbreakable. Who knew what methods the Sarkhan Empire had? Perhaps they could break this brainwashing? Even without external factors, David would not underestimate the power of human will. He had seen so many similar situations that he couldn't help but be wary. The safest approach was to eliminate the hidden dangers immediately after obtaining what he wanted. How wonderful now! No soul was left after the explosion. Clean, hygienic, environmentally friendly, and forever without future trouble. After dealing with Arsagas, David took another sip of his wine and seriously considered his next move. After much thought, David couldn't come up with any reliable solution. If only he could discuss it with his companions. As he was thinking, David suddenly felt something. He set his glass aside, closed his eyes, quietly opened his hands, and followed a strange feeling to call. Soon, David felt a distinct touch on his empty hands. When he opened his eyes again, Laura and Steve were standing on either side of him, holding hands. Releasing his hands, David rubbed his hands against his clothes. It was a perfectly normal action, but because he overlooked the fact that one of them was Laura, he was met with a vicious beating, a small fist punching his back. Ahem, welcome to the continent of Anara. After a simple explanation of the situation, Steve and Laura understood their current situation. They didn't rush to ask about a candidate, but instead inquired about how David had summoned them. I thought I could do it, so I tried it, and I didn't expect it to work. Are there any restrictions? Yes, only specific candidates can be summoned. Laura, Steve, Fording, and others had helped connect Winter City to the New World. Otherworldly visitors like Tony and Jonah couldn't be summoned. And there's a limit on the number of people. Only 2 can be summoned at a time. If you want to find someone else, I'll send you back first. Chapter 437 Blending In. The 3 of them huddled together for a moment, testing David's ability to return to Winterfell. After a brief test, David discovered that using Twinkle's teleportation abilities, he could precisely create a portal next to Twinkle. While there were some flaws, it at least confirmed that David wasn't trapped on this technologically isolated continent and could leave at any time. Returning, however, would be a bit more complicated. I've scanned the special teleportation device on the outpost and stored it here. Give it to Tony when you return. In an emergency, more people could be teleported in. However, David felt it was of little use. Things on the continent of Anara were best handled quietly. As Arsagas had said, blowing up the entire continent of Anara would halt the artificial Protoss project while also causing significant damage to Brunia. David wasn't the only one capable of resorting to such extreme measures in an emergency. The Sarkhan could also do so if necessary. In some ways, the Sarkhan were even more likely to do so. After blowing up Brunia, they could simply leave and search for another planet with life. While the artificial Protoss project is time-consuming and labor-intensive, it can still be carried out on other life-bearing planets. So, don't alert them for now. After clarifying the situation and conducting some tests, Steve's advice was, proceed quietly, without making a scene. What are your plans next? I'm going to look around here a bit and check this list. David held the list of candidates he'd received from Arsagas. Looking at the list, David suddenly thought, could he infiltrate them? Seeing David staring at the list in deep thought, Laura and Steve immediately guessed his thoughts. You want to pretend to be a candidate? Yes, David said without looking up, seriously considering the feasibility of this plan. The Sarkhan Artificial Protoss project is essentially about allowing life forms nurtured by the power of Brunia to gradually gain more power from Brunia and the recognition of the various life forms on Brunia, and then, I'm also a life born from Brunia. In this sense, David also qualifies as a candidate, but he wondered if he could gain experience from the missions and monsters assigned by these people. If possible, he could infiltrate the group, defeat all the other candidates, gain Brunia's approval, and reclaim the energy stolen by the Sarkhan. More importantly, if I can perfectly control the continent of Anara, wouldn't the Sarkhan be able to blow it up and threaten the entire planet? After hearing David's idea, Steve and Laura thought the plan was somewhat feasible. However, wouldn't it mean David would have to stay on Anara for a long time? What if something goes wrong in Winterfell? I can always go back. How do you get here? That depends on Tony. A tech-savvy Tony Stark should be able to quickly understand the Sarkhan space technology, right? He didn't need to fully understand it. As long as he could perfectly replicate the Sarkhan's teleportation equipment and get him to Anara without attracting their attention, he would be considered a success. Let's do it. The more he thought about it, the more plausible it seemed. David then sent Steve back to Winterfell and relayed the various arrangements to the others. Steve would also consult with Bruce to identify any loopholes in David's plan and help him fix them. Laura stayed behind. If David were to venture out on the continent of Anara, she certainly wouldn't miss it. For a moment, the city lord was alone in his chambers, a man and a woman, though neither of them had any desire for a fight. Laura raised her eyebrows at David, and David knew what she was asking. Azaghas is a figurehead. Winterfell is irrelevant with him or without him. He mostly acts alone and doesn't interfere with his subordinates. Similarly, his subordinates won't bother the city lord. He only made brief appearances to receive supplies, but even then, no one would be surprised. To his subordinates, Lord Azaghas was always mysterious. Therefore, even if the people of Everwinter noticed a lord's disappearance, they probably wouldn't take it too seriously. They might even assume he was simply going about his business. Azaghas, as their guide, was often away. In that case, let's get out of here, Laura said with anticipation. She was eager for the adventure ahead, vaguely recalling her first time out to sea, searching for the legendary Yamate. Go back to Winter first. I'll call you back once I'm outside the castle. That's perfect. I need to go back and make some preparations. She had come so hastily. Although some of her usual weapons were in storage, she would definitely need to pack more since she was embarking on an adventure across unfamiliar lands. Watching Steve and Laura leave, David slipped back into stealth and left the castle unimpeded. He didn't rush to reveal himself, but instead walked along the mountain path to the foot of the mountain, finding a quiet spot before disengaging. He also changed into something warm yet comfortable, styled to match the local customs. David, clad in a thick jacket, waited quietly for a moment before finally feeling Laura respond to his summons. He'd unexpectedly discovered another thing. This summon required the other person's consent before being pulled over. This was perfectly normal, otherwise, it would be incredibly awkward if he suddenly summoned someone while they were dealing with some personal issue. Looking at Laura, also dressed in a thick jacket, long pants, and long boots, David knew she shared his thoughts. Neither of them cared about the cold, given their physical fitness, but they still managed to maintain some disguises to appear less unusual. I've spoken to Eva, Helen, and Gwen about your situation. They asked me to take good care of you. Laura touched her left hand, where the mechanical bow was adorned, then glanced at her stored ring. After confirming her important belongings were there, she asked about the next plan. What's the first step? Let's go through the list and review the candidates. Laura took the list and looked at it. The first name was Dutch. Dutch? Who's that? A soldier from Everwinter. As Archaeologist wrote down the list, he gave David a general overview of the individuals. With David's current memory, he wouldn't forget it after hearing it, but he was so busy memorizing it at the time that he didn't pay much attention. Now, thinking it over, he realized the list was full of flaws. How can we find this person? Go to the nearby town of Everwinter and ask any soldier about him. Everwinter is actually part of Everwinter City, but Everwinter City's castle is built on a nearby mountain, while Everwinter City is located at the foot of the mountain. The distance between them is quite large, making them appear to be two separate regions. Furthermore, Everwinter City is located in the southernmost part of the continent of Anara, and its terrain is high, covered in snow year-round, hence the name Everwinter City. The mountain on which Everwinter City sits is also part of Snow Peak, the highest mountain in the entire continent of Anara, and is the highest peak on the continent. He casually gave Laura a general overview. The people of Everwinter City, besides hunting and trading with other towns, primarily survive on a plant that grows naturally in the Everwinter forest. This plant, called a giant yam, looks like a tree, but grows in large patches. Once dug up, the rhizome can be eaten as a staple food, while the upper portion of the trunk is highly durable and can be used as firewood, deodorizing and repelling insects. It sounds like a magical plant. Yes, David and Laura soon saw bread baked with giant yam flour, which smelled delicious. But instead of finding a table in the small inn to eat, they went straight to the sheriff, who was chatting with the owner at the bar. Before they could say anything, the sheriff, who had noticed them, greeted them. "Greetings, adventurers from afar." David and Laura stopped and looked at each other. It wasn't surprising that the sheriff could tell they weren't locals. The town was so small, and as the sheriff, he must know the residents. They were strangers, so they had to be from somewhere else. There was nothing to hide. "Hello, Your Excellency, Sheriff, let me guess. You want to take on some work with me? Earn some extra cash?" "Yes, Your Excellency, Sheriff." David hadn't expected the sheriff to be so forthcoming. Did he really have a candidate template? Did he trigger the quest mechanism directly? David decided to follow the other party's words and communicate to see what was going on. "You know what? I was also worried about not being able to find people to do some things, and your timely appearance solved my problem." The sheriff was very enthusiastic towards David. "Recently, a series of hunters have disappeared in Everwinter Forest. I ordered Captain Dutch to lead a team into Everwinter Forest to investigate, but Captain Dutch and his team entered Everwinter Forest 3 days ago and haven't been heard from since. I'd like to know what happened to him and his men." The sheriff's face was filled with worry as he spoke. "I've reported the situation to my superiors, but I don't know when they'll give clear instructions. Until then, I can't take any action. If you could investigate what happened on my behalf, I would be very grateful and would pay a reasonable fee." Chapter 438, Bard 1-Day Experience Card. Can I inquire in detail about the string of disappearances of hunters before Captain Dutch entered the Everwinter Forest? David didn't rush to accept the task, but instead launched into a series of questions. "And what's the situation with Captain Dutch's men?" David engaged the sheriff in a series of conversations, quickly confirming that the sheriff before him, Shane, wasn't just a mindless NPC, but a living, breathing person. He had his own life and thoughts, not just a mechanical tool for completing missions. As for why the sheriff triggered a game-like NPC dialogue upon seeing him, it was all based on basic common sense about the continent. David also learned from Sheriff Shane some basic information he hadn't gotten from Archaeologist. The continent of Yenera is home to numerous cities, each a separate nation, with no overarching relationship. This means that Yenera is still in the city-state era, with vast areas of disorder between factions. The continent of Yenera is home to a diverse range of races, including humans, forest elves, dark elves, mountain dwarves, crypt dwarves, orcs, and half-demons. Some of these races are scattered across the continent, while others form independent tribes and villages. Generally speaking, each tribe manages its own affairs, ignoring matters outside its territory. This has given rise to a unique group, adventurers. Adventurers are similar to mercenaries, if not quite the same, earning their keep by accepting commissions. The composition of adventurers is diverse, encompassing all races. However, adventurers share several common traits, extraordinary abilities and a penchant for wandering. Generally speaking, 9 out of 10 strangers who appear safe and sound, seemingly untroubled, are adventurers. By the way, you're a bard, you have a keen eye. How did you tell that? I've been sheriff for years and have met many adventurers. Handsome, articulate young men like you are usually bards. David smiled and downed the drink Sheriff Shane had offered him. He prepared to take another look around before heading into Everwinter Forest to investigate what had happened to Captain Dutch and his men. "Good luck," David nodded, smiling as he and Laura left the small inn, which also doubled as a tavern. Standing on Everwinter's largest cobbled street, David ignored Laura's question. "Bard, why? Can't I just be a bard part-time?" David pointed at his face. With his charm, was there really any problem with passing himself off as a bard? "Can you play the piano? Or sing?" "You want to hear me sing? Come to think of it, I've never heard you sing before. Maybe when we encounter enemies or beasts later, you could sing to cheer me up." "Good idea." It's settled. After a brief tour of Everwinter Town, David, following the information he had obtained from Sheriff Shane, headed deeper into the Everwinter Forest. These two men, both skilled and daring, didn't rest in town for the night. waiting until the next morning to enter the forest. They didn't believe anything in the forest could threaten them. As for the element that caused the disappearance of Dutch and his team, do you think we'll encounter the Predator? Or the alien? Laura looked at the portrait of Captain Dutch she had obtained from Sheriff Shane. The Terminator-like appearance finally reminded her where she'd seen this plot before. It should be the Predator, right? A team led by the governor of Forest, California. This was clearly the plot of the Predator. While there were some minor changes, the general direction remained the same. If it's an alien, we shouldn't be contacting Dutch, but Ripley. Is Ripley on the list? No. The two men moved effortlessly through the forest. The thick snow presented no difficulty. Neither needed to observe carefully, relying solely on peripheral vision and instinct to find the correct route. Both David and Laura had extensive wilderness survival experience, and their abilities had been greatly enhanced as they improved their skills and acquired a wealth of hunter knowledge. They were both experts in wilderness survival, which was why Laura had stayed with David, not just because she preferred adventure. It's getting dark. Laura looked up at the beautiful aurora sky. She hadn't expected to see such a beautiful sight here. Should we continue on our journey or rest for the night? Let's keep going. I have a feeling we'll find something soon. I hope your instincts are right. David's instincts were spot on. After another hour of walking, David and Laura found a clue to Dutch's team. There were several soldiers who had died tragically, their shattered remains lying there. One, skinned, was hanging from a nearby tree. David glanced around but didn't find Dutch's body. Instead, he spotted the Iron Warrior, lurking in the shadows, poised to ambush him, and Dutch's head, dangling from his waist. David was speechless. Did this Iron Warrior think he couldn't spot him just because he was invisible? Naive. He winked at Laura, who gave him a subtle "I noticed too" expression. Then, without warning, he grasped the mechanical bow that had transformed into his hand and drew an arrow from his ring. Draw the bow. Infuse it with holy light. Shoot with holy light. Boom. The entire sequence was seamless. The moment Laura released her grip, the Predator was effectively struck by the holy light bolt. The immense holy light imbued into the arrow erupted in a dazzling brilliance, not only inflicting heavy damage but also wiping out his invisibility. The flickering light and electrical currents emanating from the Predator's body revealed that the powerful arrow had effectively destroyed his invisibility. The fallen Predator remained unconscious, his exceptional combat awareness allowing him to launch a counterattack. The plasma cannons on his shoulders unleashed a barrage of beams. While they missed David and Laura, they formed a barrage of fire, sending dust, snow, and shattered wood from tree trunks everywhere, intended to conceal his next move. The Predator's response wasn't bad. Any ordinary adventurer, an ordinary adventurer would likely have been easily ambushed, like Dutch's team. Facing David and Laura, his resistance was a futile, desperate struggle. The barrage of plasma beams, the clouds of dust and snow, proved ineffective in stopping Laura. The Predator, completely unaware that he had been marked, was pelted with arrows, one of which pierced his shoulder cannon. Unable to stand, the Predator slumped to his knees, watching the approaching human. The woman, seemingly neither tall nor strong, had so easily defeated him. A deep sense of wonder filled him. How could the women of this planet be so formidable? The next moment, however, his doubts were shattered by an eerie, resounding voice. You are my little apple. I can never love you enough. The resounding, high-pitched voice echoed far into the still night. But that wasn't the point. The main point was the sheer bewilderment of both the Predator and Laura. Laura even missed her ultimate shot, which could have killed the Predator. She took out the arrow again, and it was still an arrow filled with holy light. After perfectly controlling the force, she shot the Iron Warrior's chest with one arrow, killing the enemy and leaving his body intact. I'll fill the wine for you to stay, eh? David was singing happily beside her, and suddenly he felt something. He looked at the Iron Warrior who had just been shot by Laura in surprise. It seems that this plan is promising. You upgraded. I'm so powerful now. It's not that easy to upgrade. David closed his eyes and felt it carefully. I just feel that I have finally found a connection with the land under my feet. We are no longer resisting each other like we did at the beginning. This is good news. Laura just remembered that she should have asked David to kill the Iron Warrior, but her whole head was buzzing just now. David's singing was too terrible. Fortunately, it didn't affect anything. Also, you sing very well. Don't sing any more in the future. David just decided that he would act as a bard on the continent of Yanara. Unexpectedly, after less than a day as a bard, She was forced to resign. I just sang with shadow magic, but it didn't work at all. No, it was so effective that it affected me. Laura finally understood why the predator had become so sluggish, why her mind had suddenly become slow. It turned out that David's singing had truly affected her. But when did you master shadow magic? I temporarily drew from the shadow dimension. Learning stealth had also allowed David to learn how to connect to the shadow dimension. Now that he knew where that world was, drawing energy from it was a simple task for a spellcaster like him. He didn't plan to store shadow energy within himself, he drew it as he needed it. It was a simple task for David anyway. However, unless he could resolve the issue of not being able to distinguish friend from foe soon, he would not be able to continue singing with shadow magic. Especially when David and Laura returned to Everwinter with a predator in Dutch's body, and learned that the entire town had a nightmare the previous night. He knew his career, as a bard, had indeed come to an end. Speaking of which, I had an idea for a character whose protagonist was a bard. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 439 Arendelle and Raccoon Town. Although he could no longer pretend to be a bard, proving his plan's feasibility was more important than anything else. The next step was simple: seize opportunities and luck wherever he could. After all, this continent was destined for David. Who else is on the list? After receiving some payment from Sheriff Shane, David and Laura sat in the small inn lobby, ordered some simple food, and ate while discussing their next move. According to Archaeologist, guides deliberately guide candidates on the path to strength and fame, and at opportune moments, deliberately pit them against each other. This behavior felt somewhat similar to the main divine realm. Alice, the one from the Resident Evil movie, probably. David did receive relevant background information from Archaeologist, but to fit the context of the continent of Yanira, the information on these people had been adjusted, making it seem plausible. Who else? Elsa. Who is this? Elsa of Arendelle. Speaking of which, the princess's kingdom of Arendelle isn't far from here, just northwest of Everwinter Forest, in a bay. David looked at the list. With Dutch's name crossed out, Elsa was the easiest to find. Also on the list was Van Helsing, a roaming adventurer who particularly targeted dark creatures and had connections to the church. Finding him would require either luck or contact through the church. There was also the Knight Duke of Greatsword Castle. His information and name were so commonplace that David couldn't think of a corresponding character plot point, so he set it aside for now. There was also Catherine Cowles, who lived in Raccoon Town, north of Everwinter, and the aforementioned Alice. There was also a princess named Maya, who grew up in a modest family, and Sophie, the daughter of a declining noble family. Is that all? Archaeologist is currently responsible for these candidates. He's responsible for fewer. The other guides were responsible for more candidates than Archaeologist, but David had no idea of their quality. From this list, it seemed these candidates all had prototypes, most likely protagonists. Perhaps the Sarkhan believed these protagonists, blessed with good fortune, would more easily carry out their plan. However, seeing how quickly Captain Dutch died, it was clear these clones didn't inherit the original's good fortune. Laura shoveled a piece of giant potato bread into her mouth, drank the last of her hot soup, and then left the inn with David. They bought some giant potatoes for rations and snacks, and walked north along the main road north of Everwinter. Walking out of Everwinter Forest, whether to Arendelle or Raccoon Town, would take considerable time. But for the two of them, armed with various modes of transportation, this wasn't a problem. Based on the principle of keeping a low profile, the two chose the Berean heavy scooter. At least it could operate on the ground, allowing them to immediately stow it away if they encountered anyone. Shortly after leaving Everwinter, David and Laura turned into the nearby woods and summoned Steve. Bruce and I discussed this, and your idea seems to be the most suitable. Bruce believed that, based on the information currently available, David's response plan was sound, and he would have made a similar choice. I previously conducted a small mission in Everwinter, and after testing, it was confirmed that I could indeed replace those candidates. That's good news, given the current situation. Several strategies would need to be pursued simultaneously. The military and government officials of Winter City would continue to expand the Kingdom of Winter's influence while governing it according to David's requirements. Bruce and his team would then develop countermeasures, including, in the event of a dire situation, how to ensure that the Sarkhan bombing of the Anura continent would not destroy Abrania, as well as a combat plan for the lunar outpost. The former was the primary focus, while the latter was a secondary concern. The reason they haven't attacked the Sarkhan lunar outpost yet is simply to avoid alerting David and buy him more time. David continues operations on the continent of Anura, striving to eliminate the hidden dangers as quickly as possible. David doesn't seek to completely recapture this energy. As long as he can control the continent and prevent the Sarkhan from detonating it, the rest of the story will be much simpler. Whether the Winter City army approaches and directly wipes out the Sarkhan and their minions on Anura, or even carries out a continent-wide purge, it's not a difficult task for the Kingdom of Winter today. As for the teleportation device you copied, Tony has seen that the Sarkhan's special technology is indeed unique. He believes that if they can understand it, the problem of interdimensional communication can be solved. Honestly, I haven't seen Tony this focused in a long time. It shouldn't be long before he can build a teleportation device that meets your requirements. David wasn't the only one who had confidence in Tony's cheating abilities. Steve shared his confidence in Tony's technological prowess. No matter how outrageous the technology, Tony Stark would surely master it in a short time and make it his own. Considering the current situation, it would also become Winterfell's technology. That's about it. After explaining everything, Steve said he wouldn't be leaving this time and would stay here. Working together, they could help David defeat the other candidates as quickly as possible. David then noticed that Steve had changed his attire for this visit. The light armor he wore was clearly a modified version of the Northwind light armor. I even changed the design on my shield. Steve showed David the new skin, a wolf head with white stripes on a black background, clearly the emblem of Winterfell. That's great. We now have a paladin and shaman who can play a part-time warrior, and a hunter who wields the power of the holy light and a part-time archaeologist. David glanced at Steve and Laura. With me as a priest and a bard, we have both melee and ranged support. It's a pretty standard adventuring party, bard. Steve glanced at Laura in confusion, only to receive a don't ask response. Steve, no longer the simple soldier he once was, immediately realized this was a fatal question and decisively skipped over the key words, pretending he hadn't heard them. Seeing Steve wasn't fooled, David sighed and set out on his journey again with his teammates. The three motorcycles quickly left the Everwinter Forest and headed to the bay northwest of Everwinter City, within the territory of the Kingdom of Arendelle. Gazing at the coastal city built on the bay in the distance, David and the others parked their motorcycles and walked into the seemingly prosperous, peaceful, and beautiful city. Unlike many cities on the Bronian continent, Arendelle lacked vast slums, filthy streets, dilapidated houses, or deadly aromas that could make one faint. This place looks like something out of a fairy tale, Laura said, looking around. Everyone wore a happy smile, as if those living here were free from all worries. Oh, not everyone looks so happy. Following Laura's gaze, David and Steve spotted a man standing not far from the city gate. He looked worried, glancing around from time to time as if searching for someone. Who do you think he's looking for? David had barely finished his words when the man's gaze flicked toward him. Then, his eyes lit up, and he walked straight toward a burly man behind David. You must be the famous adventurer Luke Hobbs, the scowling man, upon seeing the nearly 2-meter-tall man, reacted with joy and enthusiasm. As for David and the others, standing just 2 meters away, they didn't even catch a glance. I didn't expect someone this far away would have heard of me. Luke Hobbs's name is known from the Holy City in the east to Mystic Bay in the west. Even Arendelle and Everwinter have heard of your heroic deeds. He told me about the successful capture of the Doretto family, the most famous criminal gang in the Holy City, the annihilation of the evil Reyes gang, the discovery of the legendary Mystic Island, the defeat of the terrifying Behemoth, and so on. After a round of compliments, he went on to detail Luke Hobbs's deeds. Of course, he couldn't help but issue a task in the end, hoping that the famous adventurer Hobbs could help him solve some small troubles. It's just a very small trouble, but I have something to do and can't get away, so I have to ask a famous adventurer like you, Hobbs, for help. What's the matter? I invested in a laboratory in Raccoon Town, and regularly deliver a batch of special medicines to the Kingdom of Arendelle every once in a while, but the last batch of medicines has been late for a month and has not yet arrived. I hope that you, Hobbs, can go to Raccoon Town to help me check the situation. That's it. Hobbs looked skeptical, thinking that things might not be that simple. Sure enough, after hesitating for a few seconds, The other party made an expression as if he couldn't bear to deceive you. I have to admit that the medicine produced in that laboratory may attract the covetousness of competitors, so this commission is not so safe. I see. Hobbs smiled confidently after hearing this. Leave it to me. But in this case, I may need to recruit some teammates before setting off again. Ahem. David, who was still thinking about whether to grab this commission, coughed forcefully a few times to attract the attention of Hobbs and the man to himself and the others. We are very strong teammates. Chapter 440 Heading to the Hive. Luke Hobbs? You can call me Luke. Hobbs looked at David curiously. He had actually noticed the group while chatting with the man. Based on his extensive adventuring experience, he knew they were all capable adventurers, and since he needed companions for this commission, they would be excellent choices. David, Laura, and Steve. David introduced his companions to Hobbs, shook his hand, and then looked at the man next to him. It was then that the man realized he had been talking to Hobbs for so long without even introducing himself. Look at me, that's so rude. My name is Kane. Kane looked at David and the others. Although he didn't know these young adventurers, he was still very welcoming and invited them to a nice tavern for a meal and conversation. As the employer of the commission, Kane was generous, choosing a high-end restaurant and ordering a sumptuous meal. While entertaining Hobbs and David, he also explained some of the details of the commission. According to Kane, he invested in a laboratory in Raccoon Town because it offered a suitable environment. The city was well developed in pharmaceuticals, magic, and machinery, and it housed a large number of professionals in these fields. In contrast, Arendelle lacked such specialized expertise, and if he established a laboratory there, he wouldn't even be able to recruit staff. Furthermore, these special potions were allegedly sold to the Arendelle royal family. It was said that the heir to the kingdom, Elsa, had suffered from a strange illness since childhood and required the use of special potions to treat it. Hobbs wasn't interested in these details, he simply wanted to know what challenges this mission might present, so he could recruit suitable helpers based on the information provided by his employer. While eating, he didn't forget to chat with David to get a general idea of his new teammates, specifically the professions. Warrior, hunter, bard, priest. David's introduction was brief. He wanted to continue pretending to be a bard, but Laura gave him a subtle nudge, forcing him to change his name to priest. Hobbs was delighted to learn that David was a priest. He'd learned from Sheriff St. David earlier that while there were many priests willing to travel the continent, few were willing to become adventurers. Priests primarily traveled for self-cultivation, self-discipline, or to spread their faith. Even if they occasionally participated in adventures, it was usually a temporary assignment, returning to their duties once the mission was over. David didn't look like that kind of priest, and Hobbs doubted whether he was truly a priest. Despite his doubts, Hobbs didn't hastily question David's abilities. He still had some time before departure, so he could find a few more companions. Kane's description of the mission suggested it would be quite challenging, so having more people would be a safe bet. He inquired for further details, and he understood that his mission wasn't just to investigate the lab, but also to retrieve the arcane mechanism core within it and return it to Arendelle. Hobbs realized that in addition to finding a few reliable companions, he also needed a dedicated mechanism master. I'll contact the engineer for you and get horses ready for you all. That's perfect, it saves me a lot of trouble. Hobbs shoved the last of his meat into his mouth. He'd eaten most of the food on the overflowing table. His astonishing appetite told him he was no ordinary man. I'm going to recruit teammates. David, Laura, Steve. See you at dinner. Good luck. David could tell from Hobbs's words that he didn't want them to join him in recruiting. Hobbs was probably trying to secure his dominance. Kane explained the details, left a deposit, and booked rooms for everyone at the inn. He made an appointment with Hobbs to meet up tomorrow and then left. In a blink of an eye, only David, Laura, and Steve were left at the table. This guy isn't on the list, but he's probably a candidate. Laura glanced at the list in David's hand. Luke Hobbs's name wasn't on it. He was probably one of the candidates the other guides were responsible for. Steve could see something so obvious. Steve quietly poured himself a glass of wine, sipping the fermented grape juice as if he hadn't heard anything. This is supposed to be a Resident Evil plot, right? Laura glanced at the polished plates on the table, uninterested in ordering anything else. Wouldn't this be a good time to run into Alice? I guess so. David, who had been holding a leg of lamb, noticed it was cold. He released divine fire to heat it slightly before taking a large bite. Perhaps this Hobbs was deliberately led here to create a direct conflict between the candidates. Compared to Alice, David was more concerned about something else. In this situation, he, Laura, and Steve had essentially replaced the mercenaries from the original plot. Considering his role as a chaplain, wouldn't he be the team's medic? That wasn't a very auspicious position. I wonder if this hive lab has a laser tunnel? If the train leading to the underground lab is full of strange people, could there be bonus points or side quests? As David's thoughts spiraled further and further out of control, Steve suddenly set down his glass and glanced through the open window next to him toward the castle. What's wrong? I think I hear the call of the elementals. Steve had been a mere soldier, unaware of many things after 70 years of slumber. Because of David and Winterfell, he embarked on a completely different path, becoming the Sorcerer Supreme. With the Time Stone's power, Steve knew everything, how this would unfold, how many changes that development would cascade, and so on. While David's presence had fragmented the future of his world, it still provided him with a great deal of help. However, all of this had become a thing of the past since he stepped down as Sorcerer Supreme. Steve's own magical prowess was far from sufficient to allow him to casually peer into timelines, and his busy schedule left him no time to broaden his knowledge. Therefore, he couldn't immediately think of the plot. You were too busy before, but now that you have some free time, it's time to brush up on the necessary knowledge, right? David knew what Steve was talking about. Steve, however, hadn't realized it. It was clearly because he hadn't seen enough movies. It's not hard to get these resources in your world. Steve gave an awkward smile. He definitely needed to catch up. As David explained the setting and plot of Elsa and Arendelle, Steve's face turned a bit strange. Sounds like a fairy tale, Mickey Mouse cartoons, I see. Steve then asked about the plot of Resident Evil. David, feeling the need to explain, went back to his room and played the holographic version of the film again. After watching the first movie, it was still early for dinner, and Hobbs hadn't returned yet, so he started playing the second and third movies. By dinner time, Hobbs had returned with his two newly recruited teammates. The men introduced themselves to each other by name and occupation. Even though they were acquaintances, David carefully observed the two wanderers, Jack, and the warrior, John, and determined they didn't match anyone he remembered. He assumed they were merely supporting characters, not potential candidates. However, the next day, Kane brought along Kaplan, the mechanic, who surprised David slightly. Wasn't that the computer expert from the original film? In that case, could this man, Kane, who bore the same appearance as the villainous chief in Resident Evil II, be a guide? A Sarkhan? Or perhaps a direct subordinate of the Sarkhan on this continent? After pondering for a few seconds, David didn't want to waste his energy on this matter. His priority now was to seize opportunity and luck. The number of Sarkhan on the Enola road wasn't particularly important. Mounting the top-quality horses Kane had prepared for them, and stocking up on rations, dried meat, and water, they galloped towards Raccoon Town. Leading the group, Luke Hobbs, possessed a massive build, assuming he rode a towering warhorse of exceptional pedigree. Even laden with a nearly 2-meter-tall man and a vast supply of weapons and supplies, this sturdy steed could gallop at lightning speed, easily outpacing the other horses. Had Hobbs not controlled his horse's speed, he might have reached Raccoon Town even faster on his own. Even so, the Improvi team of 7 reached their destination, the outskirts of Raccoon Town, by dusk the next day. According to Kane's information, the entrance to the laboratory codenamed Beehive is located in the manor not far ahead, Hobbs said, tethering the horses as he made final arrangements before the operation. I just used the magic item Kane gave me to send a signal, but there's been no response from the manor. It's safe to assume there's something wrong in the lab. The next step was to enter the lab and retrieve the potion and the mechanism core Kane requested, a process that, if still present, would likely involve a battle with one or more unknown forces. Let's make sure no one's backing out, right? Seeing no one was ready to quit, Hobbs nodded and said, let's go. As he spoke, he took out his sledgehammer and double-edged battle axe, and with his weapons in hand, he walked towards the dark manor. The next second, arrows rained down. John, Jack, dead. Chapter 441 Hobbs and Alice. Hobbs swung his hammer and axe like two propellers, deflecting all the incoming arrows. Steve took a simpler approach, simply raising his shield to prevent any arrows from hitting him. Laura and David huddled behind Steve, slowly moving forward with him. While the arrows wouldn't have harmed David without his holy light shield, He decided to act normal for now, to maintain a low profile. Glancing at the two bodies nearby, Jack and John looked even more like hedgehogs. Even if all the arrows were removed, no one would be able to identify them. What a tragedy. After a moment's silence for the two extras, David checked on Kaplan. He realized that the engineer, introduced by Kane, had been well positioned and had avoided the initial barrage of arrows. He had immediately taken shelter behind a tree, and was now poking his head out to investigate. Even as David was inspecting the situation, Hobbs had already rushed to the manor house, two heavy weapons in hand. With a single bound, he leaped onto the rooftop, swung his sledgehammer, and in a matter of moments, he had reduced the automated crossbow mechanisms on the roof to rubble. Boom! Leaping from the rooftop, Hobbs gently stretched his neck. This little spectacle wasn't even a warm-up for him. It was a shame that his two recruits had perished before even getting through the gate. These appear to be the manor's automated defenses. How strange. If the lab was attacked, how did they avoid them? Normally, unauthorized intrusion within a certain radius would trigger the automated defenses. If the hive lab was under attack from outside, there was no reason why they wouldn't be triggered until now. Something's amiss. Everyone, be extra cautious. Hobbs, a man of many accomplishments, was no mere brawn. He even began to wonder if he should abandon the commission altogether. But considering the lack of substantive evidence, retreating would be detrimental to his reputation, so he decided to investigate first. He turned to look at David and the others, who showed no intention of retreating either. Seeing this, Hobbs decided not to leave. After all, the renowned Luke Hobbs couldn't afford to be outdone by a few unknowns, could he? Watching Hobbs stride into the mansion, David and Steve exchanged a glance and both spread their hands. They both saw it. Hobbs sensed something was amiss, but burdened by his reputation, he passed up his best opportunity to withdraw. What a shame. If he'd chosen to leave now, it might have been a good thing. Laura saw the same thing, and her words weren't just about what was about to happen at Hive Labs. They were referring to the entire candidate program. As a candidate, if Luke Hobbs pressed forward relentlessly, he would inevitably run into a wall called David. David's stance determined his relationship with the candidates. Unless Hobbs voluntarily lowered his status and became David's teammate, essentially giving up his role as the protagonist and willingly accepting a supporting role, everyone present could see that Hobbs clearly wasn't the type to do that. What are you going to do? Laura looked at David and gestured towards Hobbs, who had already entered the mansion. David didn't hesitate. Let it go. What else could he do? David's only option was to explain the situation clearly before taking action, ensuring a clear and unambiguous death. Of course, if Hobbs had died directly in the laser tunnel like the mercenary captain in the original storyline, David wouldn't have to worry about losing sight of him. Following him into the mansion, they wouldn't have to worry about being slow to find Hobbs. The large man was standing in the mansion's spacious hall, talking to a woman in a long red dress. Having just rewatched the Resident Evil plot yesterday afternoon, the few who had seen him immediately recognized this woman as Alice, the undisputed protagonist of the Resident Evil film. Now you have two candidates standing before you. Should we take action? Ignoring Steve's jugglery, David stepped over to Hobbs's side. Alice paused for a moment upon seeing David, carefully examining him twice before glancing at Laura and Steve. These are my teammates. As Hobbs questioned the clueless Alice, Kaplan finally arrived inside the mansion. He quickly slipped into character, examining the various mechanisms. He ultimately concluded that the mechanisms had been activated, and Alice's current state of ignorance was likely the residual effects of a mental attack. Hobbs, who had hoped to extract some information from the lab's guardian, was met with disappointment. How long will it take her to recover? A few hours if possible, a few days to a month if possible, Hobbs cursed under his breath, unable to understand what this bizarre mechanism was. At that moment, Hobbs seemed to sense something. Before he could signal his teammates, he saw Steve suddenly throw his shield. Clang, clang, bang. The round shield, after two deflections, accurately struck a man hiding in a corner, then rebounded again and flew back into Steve's hands. Seeing this outrageous scene, Hobbs didn't even bother to care about the unconscious unknown person. He looked at Steve and the shield in his hand with curiosity. What kind of shield is that? The best round shield in our village. As the two men talked, David brought the unknown person back, a young man wearing simple leather armor and a standard one-handed sword at his waist. Hobbs frowned when he saw the man's attire and weapon. Just when he wanted David to wake this man up, The man woke up by himself. I am Matthew Addison, the local patrol guard. Why is the patrol guard only wearing simple leather armor? And running to someone else's house so late? I just heard some noise over here and came to check. I'm not wearing guard armor because I'm not on duty. The man stood up and checked himself, and found that except for a little pain in the back of his neck, there was nothing unusual elsewhere. Who are you? I'm Luke Hobbs. I was commissioned by the owner here to investigate if there was any situation in the laboratory he invested in. Luke Hobbs? Matthew Addison was shocked when he heard this. That Luke Hobbs? I don't know which one you are referring to, but I am indeed Luke Hobbs. Luke Hobbs from the Holy City. It's me. Wow. Matthew, whose face was suddenly filled with joy, opened his mouth to say something, but before he could open his mouth, he was interrupted by Kaplan, who had been busy for a long time. The secret door's unlocked. We can go in. Matthew, as if reminded of something, immediately shut up. His expression of surprise vanished, and he surveyed his surroundings with a wary gaze, glancing at David and the others. When his gaze fell on David, Matthew was surprised to find that he actually nodded and greeted him. It was strange. Matthew didn't understand why the young man had such a confident expression. Was it because he was Hobbs's teammate? Was he confident in Luke Hobbs? Filled with questions and with his own investigations, Matthew followed Hobbs and his group through the secret door Kaplan had opened, even though Hobbs didn't harass or detain him. Once inside, they discovered a small train station, with a magical subway train parked before them. To David and the others, the atmosphere shifted dramatically. If they had previously been in a medieval mansion, they were now in modern times. However, the core still maintained its magical charm. The minor glitches on the magical subway were easily fixed, and Kaplan, the engineer, claimed he could easily fix them. Indeed, after Kaplan tinkered with them, the magical subway restarted, and everyone boarded. Inside, they discovered the source of all evil, Spence Parks, Alice's fake husband, who stole the virus in the original film and smashed a vial of the original virus solution on his way out. The subway quickly reached its final destination, only to find the locked gate ahead. Entering here is the true entrance to the Hive Lab, Kaplan explained, busy unlocking the gate. It's up to you now, don't worry, I can handle whatever happens inside. At this point, Alice, who had been following along in a daze, finally decided to demand clarification. However, she didn't question Hobbs, who was clearly the leader, but instead stood before David. What the hell is going on? Seeing David remain silent, Alice grabbed his arm, as if to make her position clear. I want to know the details right now. The investors of Hive Labs didn't receive their shipments on time and suspect the lab has been attacked by a competitor, so they've asked us to investigate. That's all I know. David finished his explanation with a smile, feeling sorry that his temporary role as guide didn't seem to earn any rewards from Alice. After all, we're just adventurers hired on a temporary basis. As for the rest of the situation, we'll only know once we enter the hive. Chapter 442, Necromancer Red Queen. Upon entering the hive, everyone was shocked by the horrific scene. Hobbs, observing the researchers' various deaths, grew increasingly suspicious of a conspiracy. Following Kaplan's directions, they made their way smoothly to the legendary dining room number 2. Hobbs's expression was grim as he gazed upon the monstrous creatures trapped within the unusual iron cabinets. You tell me, this place is a diner? This flurry of events had left Hobbs deeply suspicious of Kaplan. What exactly was this supposed hive laboratory? Was this engineer a spy sent by the enemy? What trouble would he face after completing this mission? At this point, Hobbs no longer cared about his role as leader or captain. He didn't want to die in such a state. He decided to test David and the others' confidence, clarify their identities, and, once he was certain they weren't Kane's agents, they could discuss their next steps. Just as Hobbs was thinking this, David, who was examining another iron cabinet, chimed in. Maybe it's a restaurant, but it's definitely not for humans. Hobbs glanced at David, who was not far away, then at Alice, who looked puzzled and clearly hadn't thought of anything yet. Whatever, let's get this mission done. Potions and other supplies were nowhere to be found, so his only remaining task was to retrieve the arcane mechanism's core and bring it back to Arendelle. They arrived at the core of the mechanism, and David, watching Kaplan busy at work, had an interesting thought. What will happen next? He cast a small spell to create a chat room for himself, Laura, and Steve, allowing them to communicate telepathically without worrying about being overheard. If that happens, Hobbs will probably attack you. Indeed, although they hadn't spent much time together, they had already gotten a good idea of Hobbs's character. He wouldn't abandon a mission unless it was clear his employer was trying to trick him. At that moment, the hive, once bright as day, suddenly dimmed. Then, backup lights came on, and several nearby iron doors clicked open. "What's going on?" The three of them immediately turned to Kaplan, the engineer, proudly announcing his accomplishment. "I've completely shut down the core. Now we can just remove it and leave." How could this Kaplan be even more powerful than the original Kaplan? He'd actually shut down the hive's mainframe directly? Did the original story require a laser tunnel? Where was the promised laser tunnel? Hobbs, unaware of David's inner curses, quickly retrieved the core and handed it to Kaplan, the engineer, for safekeeping. He then prepared to return to Arendelle with everyone. Despite the many strange circumstances, he could ignore them as long as he could successfully complete the mission. However, things weren't going his way. Before he could even leave the core area, the monster he'd seen in the iron cabinet in the second dining room appeared before him. "Ugly monster, I knew you'd cause me trouble." Hobbs glanced at the wound on his arm, dismissing the minor injury. Drawing his warhammer and great axe, he charged forward with a roar. Alice and the others, startled by the sudden appearance of the monster, were at a loss, unsure what to do in this situation. Kaplan, on the other hand, was resolute, immediately stepping behind Steve, completely entrusting his safety to the shield-bearing warrior. Besides the successive, seemingly flayed lickers, zombies began to appear. Hobbs, battling the lickers with two heavy weapons, noticed the increasing number of undead creatures around him and finally understood the secrets hidden in this damned laboratory. Damn it! There's a necromancer here. For some reason, David felt that roar was full of criticism. "Aren't you going to attack yet?" Laura, already bow and arrow drawn, pointed at the surrounding zombies one by one, occasionally shooting at the more threatening lickers. She looked at David, who stood behind her, as if she and Kaplan were just support personnel with little combat power. "Are you planning to leave all these zombies to us? I don't think there are enough zombies for you to kill alone." David observed the zombies around him carefully. He found that they all carried the power of death. These zombies were indeed awakened by a mysterious force, not created by viruses in the movies. This also made them not as fragile as in the movies. Even if shot in the head, they would continue to advance towards their target and attack with determination. He didn't need to remind his teammates, everyone present could sense this. David was more concerned about the source of this power of death. Could there really be a powerful necromancer hiding in this world's hive? As expected, the unknown tends to pique curiosity. David pondered for a moment, ready to strike and try to lure out the mastermind. But he looked up and saw that the last zombie had been slain by Steve with a single blow of his hammer. Both Steve, a paladin, and Laura, a holy light hunter, had realized that these undead could only be killed by defeating the death force within them. Therefore, each of their attacks was imbued with a powerful holy light. These two were undeniably undead nemesis. The swarm of zombies surrounding them was quickly crushed to the ground as they cut through them, never to rise again. Even Hobbs was amazed at their fighting prowess. It was only then that he realized these makeshift teammates were no ordinary warriors and hunters, a paladin, and a hunter who wields holy power. Glancing at David, who claimed to be a priest, Hobbs suspected that the priest had joined him in Raccoon Town specifically to confront the evil necromancer. Unaware he'd been misunderstood, David suddenly felt a surge of deathly force fill the entire space, surging into the corpses strewn across the floor. "It's not over yet, be careful." He raised his hand and delivered a smite, slaying the zombie clutching Matthew's leg once again. David's holy light was pure and powerful, and with a single casual strike, it completely shattered the newly infused death force within the zombie. Steve, realizing these zombies could still reanimate, frowned and stamped his foot, using the group attack skill Consecration. Powerful, rich holy light erupted from the floor, bathing all the zombies present, newly imbued with death force, and dissolving the death force within them once more. Hobbs swallowed hard as he watched countless zombies, some rising, others barely raising their heads, now lying on the ground again. The situation here was far more dire than he'd anticipated. If he were to deal with these undead creatures, no matter how hard he tried, he wouldn't be able to escape alive. These makeshift teammates were incredibly powerful. Could they have been specially sent by the church? Even as Hobbs was mulling over various theories, David had already pinpointed the enemy's location. What a surprise! They're right next to us. With a wave of his hand, he snatched the bag from Kaplan's hand and tossed it into the air. Following this, a wave of holy light blasted it into smithereens. But just a second before the core was shattered, a translucent shadow flew out, hovering above the massive corpses. David, upon recognizing the shadowy figure, could hardly contain his ire. Isn't that Red Queen? She's gone from artificial intelligence to undead? And judging by her appearance, she's a formidable necromancer. Just as the seemingly cute and harmless Red Queen was about to resurrect the horde of corpses around her, she suddenly sensed a formidable threat approaching. Leveraging her undead special abilities, she instantly teleported away. As Red Queen fled, a pillar of fire descended from the sky, incinerating the corpses on the ground in the blink of an eye. Red Queen was about to say something, but in that instant, she felt a fear of death. She hadn't felt this way since her transformation into undead form. The pillar of fire, brimming with divine power, was terrifying. Even though it didn't even touch her, descending from such a distance, she felt as if she were being purged. Who are you, David? Having cleared out the scattered soldiers, David waved his hand gently, sealing the area with holy light to prevent the undead necromancer from escaping. Red Queen glanced around, sensing the entire space sealed by terrifying divine power. She understood what she faced: death. It was a sure thing. Seeing this, Red Queen dropped her pretense. She shed her innocent, well-behaved, and adorable appearance and gradually transformed into a skeleton in a red dress, her flesh rotting away. She screamed frantically at David. HMPH, just an incompetent howl. The deathly shriek, tinged with the aura of death, would be a deadly threat to the average mortal, but to David, it was just noise. The damage wasn't even as great as David's casual rendition of the dazzling little apple. Shut up. Without any skill or reputation, he casually condensed a massive beam of holy light and blasted it at the Red Queen, silencing her death shriek and bringing her to near death. Watching the Red Queen's slowly fading form, David began to wonder, how will the story develop from here? Just then, he heard the Red Queen's vicious curse: "The Umbrella Mage Society will not let you go, and the church behind you." Chapter 443, Elsa in Coma. Watching the fading Red Queen, David's mind was a bit confused. What the hell could an umbrella wizard be? So, in this world, Umbrella wasn't a pharmaceutical company anymore, but an organization founded by wizards? Judging by the situation, it was most likely an organization of necromancers. That makes perfect sense. Thinking about it, if that were the case, then Umbrella's desire to turn the entire world into a dead zone wouldn't be surprising at all. It would definitely be more plausible than the environmental theme in the original movie. After carefully scanning the area with his senses to ensure there were no other necromancers nearby, David felt his connection to the continent of Anara grow even stronger before he could say anything. That's a pretty generous reward for a quest. Emerging from the hive and breathing in the fresh air, David had the strange feeling that even a casual breath of air slightly increased his strength. However, he didn't rush to check on himself, instead glancing at Hobbs and Alice. On the way out of the hive, Matthew revealed his true identity. He wasn't a patrol guard in Raccoon Town, but a freelance adventurer. He came to Raccoon Town because his sister worked at the hive and had brought him a tip. Some sinister experiment was underway there. This part was largely unchanged from the original story. While leaving the hive, Matthew found his sister's body. To protect the body from being desecrated by the necromancer and to facilitate transportation, Matthew asked David to cremate his sister on the spot, collecting the ashes and bringing them back home for burial. Of the remaining people, Alice and Spence agreed to stay in Raccoon Town, while Luke Hobbs prepared to return to Arendelle. He wanted to find the man named Kane and find out what he was up to. Without stopping in Raccoon Town, they left the hive and headed straight back to Arendelle. Unsurprisingly, Kane had vanished. "Looks like my mission is over," Hobbs joked. He wasn't really interested in completing his mission, but rather in apprehending Kane and questioning his true intentions. Throughout the journey, he pondered over and over, unable to fathom the motives of this man named Kane. If Kane was a member of the Umbrella Mages, then why would he hire a stranger like him to investigate the hive? If he sensed some sinister plot being hatched by the Umbrella Mages, why wouldn't he just speak up? Why lie to him and not provide any crucial intelligence? Was he simply trying to get him killed? No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't come up with a plausible explanation. Hobbs felt as if he had fallen into a vast web, as if a vast hand were secretly manipulating everything. He glanced at David, a priest suspected of being from the Vatican, who might be able to shed some light on his doubts. "I know what you want to ask." David didn't even look at Hobbs, perfectly stabbing the question he was about to ask. All I can say is, if you choose to return home and stay quiet for a few years, then all these problems will be solved. What if I continue to venture out? David didn't answer, turning his head and giving Hobbs a look that said, is that even necessary? Hobbs realized the question was indeed unnecessary. If he persisted in his adventures, he would likely become entangled deeper and deeper, ultimately becoming mired in the conspiracy. David wanted to see what Hobbs would choose. If possible, he hoped that all the chosen candidates on the continent of Yanara would stay put in their hometowns and not wander off. That would save him a lot of trouble. Hobbs was still pondering when another situation arose. A group of heavily armed Arendelle soldiers, bearing weapons, surrounded them. A sword-wielding officer, after carefully examining them, shouted, "Are you Luke Hobbs?" "Yes." "Did you just return from Raccoon Town?" "Yes." The officer immediately signaled to his men to escort the group away. As for why? The officer offered no explanation. But mere seconds later, he knelt on the ground, clutching his swollen mouth, and began explaining the entire situation. Her Royal Highness Princess Anna has invited Hobbs and his companions to the palace for a discussion. "So, Her Royal Highness actually sent you to invite us?" The officer was confused as to why the group was led by this young man, and not Luke Hobbs as he'd assumed, but he nodded obediently. It couldn't be helped, his face was swollen from the young man's beating. Seeing him so easily knock down all the soldiers, and his men still groaning on the ground, he should have been grateful for the mercy. "Then why are you acting like you're arresting a criminal?" The officer's explanation finally made David understand the reason for Arendelle's officers' and soldiers' attitude. Ultimately, it was that man named Cain who was to blame. Although the officer didn't know the specifics, Princess Elsa, the highly anticipated heir to the throne, had recently fallen ill. Rumors circulated that she had been poisoned or subjected to some kind of vicious spell. Cain, a longtime supplier of medicine to the princess, had recently disappeared, becoming the prime suspect. Finding Cain became the primary concern of all Arendelle officials. Their only lead was that Cain had recently hired Hobbs and his gang. Because of Princess Elsa's health concerns, the soldiers naturally couldn't be too polite with the suspect's accomplices, leading to the brief conflict. "So that's how it is," David said, radiating a holy light that healed the soldiers' injuries. The officer, clutching his now pain-free and swollen cheek, glanced at his men. Everyone stood up, some marveling at how their sprained hands, bruised legs, and stubbed toes had healed. "Actually, we were also tricked by that guy named Cain. If we hadn't had some tricks up our sleeve, we might have died in Raccoon Town, so it was all a misunderstanding." "Yes, Her Royal Highness Princess Anna is waiting for guests at the palace." With just a few words, the misunderstanding was cleared up, as if everything just happened was just an illusion. Escorted by officers and soldiers, David and the others entered the castle of Arendelle and met Her Royal Highness Anna, one of the two princesses, in the main hall. "It's an honor to meet you, Your Highness. Welcome to Arendelle." A subordinate had already rushed back to explain the situation to Princess Anna. Princess Anna already knew that the group before her was not led by Hobbs, and that they were not allies with Cain. They even had some grudges against each other. Upon hearing this news, Princess Anna knew her previous plan was useless. If it weren't for politeness, she wouldn't even want to waste time meeting them. For now, she had to deal with it. Anna's mind was preoccupied with her sister's situation. And even the adventure stories she had been most curious about were no longer of interest. Seeing the princess's expression, David chose the most direct approach. After a brief greeting, he turned the conversation directly to Princess Elsa. "I can heal Princess Elsa." "Yes, I'm a priest." "Really?" Princess Anna was overjoyed. Compared to her perfunctory smile just now, her face now displayed a genuine smile, filled with anticipation. "Can you heal Elsa?" "Yes." David's answer was not the least bit understated. He was confident in his healing abilities and didn't believe he couldn't solve Elsa's problem. What's so difficult about it? He could heal Odin, who was at the end of his life, so why couldn't he heal a mere Elsa? Led the way. Following the excited Anna all the way to Elsa's bedroom, they could sense a powerful chill from a distance. What a tremendous amount of energy. Steve, a former sorcerer supreme, was very sensitive to energy. The closer he got, the more he could sense the enormity and terrifying power of this energy. Laura watched her breath, shocked to feel a hint of chill. This temperature, she was curious. Could ordinary people really get close to Elsa at this temperature? Looking up at Anna, she saw that although the princess was wrapped up tightly, She was still shivering with her arms and legs crossed. Her teeth chattered as she spoke, making a crackling sound. It seems, it's getting worse. David waved his hand and cast a holy light shield over Anna, blocking out the cold and allowing her to move freely in the frigid environment. Thank you. Seeing this, her confidence in David grew stronger. Perhaps he could really cure Elsa. Steve paused as he continued walking with David. David was treating the princess, so he didn't need his help. And since the princess's boudoir was just ahead, it would be impolite to go any further. As for Hobbs, he had long since given up on going any further. The terrifying cold was beyond his endurance. The two of them stayed there while David and Laura followed Anna to Elsa's bedroom, where they met Princess Elsa, who seemed to be sleeping in a palace of ice. Sister, she's been like this for days. Anna described Elsa as occasionally conscious, but the cold she released when she fell unconscious again became even more terrifying. If this continued, it wouldn't be long before the entire kingdom of Arendelle would be affected. Can it be cured? David observed her carefully and saw the crux of the matter. Elsa had indeed been poisoned. Based on the current trend, either Elsa would use her inner strength to extinguish the force of death, while Arendelle would be destroyed by the cold, or she would be transformed by the evil forces into a powerful necromancer, turning Arendelle into a realm of the dead. In either case, Arendelle was doomed. Chapter 444. This number is really unlucky. Princess Anna's face paled as she recounted her observations. She hadn't anticipated the severity of the situation. Elsa had possessed magical powers since childhood, relying on medication sent by Cain for years to control them. She initially assumed the medication had stopped, causing her powers to spiral out of control. As Elsa's condition worsened, Anna gradually realized something was amiss, but she hadn't anticipated its severity. Can you heal Elsa? Princess Anna felt the situation was far more serious than she had anticipated. Could David, a priest who had appeared out of nowhere, truly heal Elsa? Should she take Elsa to the Vatican and ask the Archbishop for treatment? Even as Anna pondered these questions, David placed his hand on Elsa's forehead. A stream of black smoke emerged from Elsa's mouth and nose, coalescing into the shape of a terrifying skull. The skeleton formed from the black smoke let out a piercing scream. Just as Anna covered her ears with her hands, David raised his other hand and, with a powerful backhand of holy light, blasted the skeleton into dissolution. The screaming ceased abruptly. Elsa, lying pale on the bed, saw her cheeks return to color. The corners of her lips, once tightly pursed, curled up, and she looked like she was sleeping soundly. It's done. David withdrew his hand. Elsa, who was still asleep, seemed to have lost something. She whimpered and tossed around in bed, stroking her hands for a long time before she hugged the pillow and shifted her position to continue sleeping. Seeing that Elsa had truly recovered, the biting cold gradually dissipated. Anna led David out of the room and called for the servants to move Elsa to another room. This frozen room would probably take considerable time and effort to restore. After David followed Anna out of the room, he noticed a particularly noticeable streak of white hair on Anna's head. Raising his hand, he shed another shower of holy light. This is a bonus gift. It can dispel the power within you. Anna was still wondering what David was doing, but after hearing his explanation, she realized that David had not only healed Elsa, but also herself. Although she didn't think she had any hidden dangers, it was still a good thing. Thank you very much for your kind help. After leaving Elsa's bedroom, Anna took David and the reunited Steve, Hobbs, and others to the living room. After inviting David and the others to sit down and offering them drinks and snacks, Anna solemnly thanked David. The Kingdom of Arendelle will always remember your kindness. Elsa and I will also always remember your warm help. After verbally thanking him, Anna asked David and the others what their plans were. Perhaps a powerful priest like David came to the Kingdom of Arendelle in the south of the continent to spread his teachings? If so, Anna was willing to personally fund David's construction of a church in Arendelle. David had to make it clear that he wasn't planning on preaching in Arendelle, nor would he build a church there. He had other matters to attend to. So, where are you going next? How long will you be staying in Arendelle? For now, that's great. Anna was delighted to hear David wasn't leaving immediately. While she believed David had indeed cured Elsa, she still wanted him to stay longer, to make sure Elsa was completely alright before leaving. She also remembered what David had said earlier, Elsa had been poisoned. And who was planning to destroy the entire Kingdom of Arendelle? These matters were far too complex for a young girl, barely even an adult, to handle. If David stayed, perhaps she could ask him and his companions to help resolve them. Anna made no secret of her feelings. The naive girl firmly believed David was a righteous and good man, having helped her and Elsa from the moment he appeared. He could never be a bad guy. Since he was a good person, she could trust him completely, and if she was in trouble, she could ask for help directly. There was nothing to be ashamed of. Of course, she wasn't demanding his help. David was free to refuse. To Anna's delight, David didn't refuse. Anna's request didn't conflict with his plans. Elsa hadn't become a necromancer, nor had she completely frozen Arendelle. Surely the mastermind would come out to investigate? Just as David was thinking this, he felt he had received another reward. Clearly, exposing the necromancer's conspiracy and saving Arendelle had earned David another reward. And judging by previous events, he had also gained immense reputation in Arendelle. For example, after helping Sheriff Shane find Dutch's body and uncover what had happened to Dutch and the others, Sheriff Shane spread David's story throughout Everwinter. Unfortunately, Everwinter had so few quests. If David had completed more, perhaps his reputation would have soared, even surpassing that of the Lord Mayor. By then, perhaps David's desire to become the Lord of Everwinter would be met with support from the townspeople. But in Arendelle, he probably wouldn't be able to ascend the throne. The people of Arendelle deeply supported the sisters, even in recent years, when they'd been completely incapable of handling government affairs. No one had considered replacing them. I think it's still possible. If you marry the sisters, wouldn't you become king of Arendelle, after settling into the lodgings Princess Anna had arranged for them? David, Laura, and Steve discussed the experience rewards and reputation gains. Hobbs, after careful consideration, decided to leave. He didn't say whether he would return to his home city or continue his adventures. David, judging by his expression, felt that Hobbs was likely seeking the truth. This isn't a fairy tale. I just met the sisters, and Elsa's still unconscious. Isn't Arendelle a fairy tale land? A princess in crisis, unconscious, is rescued by a handsome young man. It's all kiss away from a fairy tale. Well, let's get down to business. David felt the conversation was getting increasingly outrageous and decisively ended the subject. I left a mark on Hobbs. Perhaps we can follow him to find another guide. Besides robbing the other candidates of their luck, finding the guides would also resolve potential problems. He had no clue before, but now that he'd encountered them, David made an additional arrangement. If they could find all the Sarkhan here, there wouldn't be any need to worry about the sudden explosion of the Anara continent, right? It's a pity you can't summon too many people. Otherwise, if everyone searched the continent, it wouldn't be that difficult to find all of them. In a continent with such clear power distribution and only adventurers roaming around, finding the candidates and their guides was a piece of cake. Unfortunately, David can only summon 2 teammates at a time. If the people of Winter City could travel back and forth freely, the continent of Anara wouldn't be a threat. Instead, it would become a new dungeon for Winter City. Speaking of which, send me back to see what's going on. Maybe Tony's made some progress there. Steve felt like he'd just be a shadowy figure here, so he might as well return to Winter City. David would be staying in Arendelle anyway, so even if those necromancers attacked, David's strength wouldn't be a concern for his safety. Alright, David felt it was more important for Steve to return and continue researching the resurrection tablet than to hang around with him here. Let me think about who's been free lately. Thinking about it, David realized there were actually quite a few outsiders in Winter City who were idle. They included Mark, Will, Helen, Gwen, Aidon, and so on. Even the location-finding agent, Clarice, wouldn't be delayed in being summoned here to help. David could just send Clarice back when he needed a location. With so many candidates, David was at a loss for who to choose. Even the next day, he still hadn't decided who to invite, so he simply left the spot open and chose his teammates based on the situation. Just as he was thinking this, Elsa suddenly approached David. "Hello, I'm Elsa. Thank you so much for your kind help. You helped me heal my illness and saved my country." Elsa, dressed in a black and green dress, her hair neatly tied back, bowed to David upon seeing him. "You're welcome," David said, about to say come in, but then realized something was wrong. Seeing Elsa some distance from the door, he stepped out of the room. "How are you feeling?" Seeing David standing before her, Elsa casually invited him to take a walk in the garden. "I'm feeling much better." Even so, David noticed a hint of uncertainty in Elsa's tone, and her hands were clad in specially made gloves, carefully avoiding any contact. "David, familiar with the plot, understood the situation. It seemed the poisoning hadn't altered Elsa's understanding of her own powers. She still didn't realize she could perfectly control these powers, still believing the immense power within her was a huge problem. Lying is wrong, especially when a patient is facing a priest. The two of them had already reached the garden. Elsa lowered her head and hesitated for a long moment before saying, "My other problems aren't so easily cured." In Elsa's opinion, this wasn't the same as being poisoned. Her innate condition was simply incurable. "Are you talking about the immense magical power within you? Wouldn't it be easier to learn how to control it?" Chapter 445, Dangerous Winter City. Elsa was stunned by David's words, her eyes widening to a point David found them truly magical. They were truly enormous. After a long pause, Elsa finally expressed her disbelief. "This kind of thing, isn't it possible? Why not?" David raised his hand, motioning for Elsa to extend it, but was rebuffed. Elsa shielded her chest with her hands, her face tinged with anticipation and a touch of fear. The look of wanting to reach out, yet not daring to, was truly pitiful. "Don't worry, your power won't harm me." David channeled the holy light, coating his palms in a faint golden glow. He then condensed a ball of holy light within his palms, which he then condensed into a blooming flower. "Believe in yourself. You can do this, too, this kind of thing." "Can I really do it?" Elsa, unsure, removed her gloves and spread out her fair, tender hands. She stood there, staring blankly at them for a long moment, but nothing happened. "Relax, don't resist this power." David knew Elsa still harbored a deep resistance to her own powers. When they threatened to be unleashed, she instinctively tried to block and suppress them. This long-standing habit had made the power within her increasingly unruly. In reality, these problems were her own fault. If she could let go of her inner ties and abandon her fear of these powers, she would immediately be able to harness them with ease. Possessing immense magical power, Elsa could even create new life with ease. The magic within her was both vast and of exceptional quality. Although the Elsa before him didn't live in her original world, David had already discovered that these copycats on the continent of Yanala were practically indistinguishable from the originals. Some candidates had even been enhanced to fulfill the candidate project and adapt to the continent. Like Hobbes, David could sense that the large figure possessed a unique bloodline, demonstrating that this individual was more than just a template for an elite agent. Elsa's body hadn't been fused with any other attributes, and even the imitation itself was already incredibly powerful. No wonder the Sarkhan had chosen her as a candidate, even preparing a tragic scenario for her, with her nation and family destroyed. However, David had now ripped that script to shreds, seemingly returning to the original fairy tale plot. Was Elsa's inherent aura of good fortune truly at work? This was truly a question worth exploring. "Relax, follow the flow. Don't worry, it won't hurt me." David casually brushed off the ice crystals and continued to instruct Elsa on how to properly control her power. Initially startled by her accidental freezing of half David's body, Elsa was tempted to back off again, but David's reassuring, "It's nothing to worry about," made her reluctant to let it go. David, disregarding his own safety, was now giving her instructions. Was she truly going to give up? If she could learn to properly wield her power, as David had instructed, would Anna and the Kingdom of Arendelle no longer be threatened by the powerful force within her? In the long run, once she could harness this power, would she also be able to protect her kingdom and her home? Encouraged by David, Elsa tried again. This time, she finally managed to control her power, allowing it to condense into a glowing blue ice crystal in her palm. "See, I wasn't kidding. You can do it." Elsa gazed at the ice crystal in her hand and began to transform it into plants, animals, and anything else she could imagine. As the transformations accelerated, she felt the power within her become increasingly obedient, and she felt as if she could perform even more miraculous feats. In the bushes not far away, Anna stared at her sister with wide eyes. She hadn't seen her sister smile so happily in years. Thinking back to recent events, her sister had been poisoned and fallen into coma, plunging Arendelle into a profound crisis. A handsome young man had appeared in time, not only healing her sister and averting the crisis, but also bringing back Elsa's genuine smile. It's love. Anna, having heard so many love stories, immediately made her own judgment. It's exactly like what's described in the story. There's no way I'm wrong. So, David must be her brother-in-law, right? Anna looked at the two people not far away, thinking they were a perfect match. She began to imagine their wedding. Just as Anna was helping her sister imagine a beautiful tomorrow, she was surprised to find someone else beside her, squatting there like her, peering through the grass at the two people in the distance. Miss Laura, S.H. You've cracked the Sarkhan teleportation technology. David looked at the man before him, his face filled with an expression of "I'm truly that amazing, keep praising me." He knew it was Tony Benny without a doubt. The Sarkhan technology is indeed unique, but once you understand the core, cracking it isn't that difficult. Tony glanced around. His immense curiosity about Arendelle and the continent of Anara was the primary motivation for his rapid mastery of this new technology. So, now the people of Winterfell can come to Anara without being noticed by the Sarkhan. I'm sure they won't, is that so? David stroked his chin. It seemed like there was no need for him to stay here and slowly steal the luck of the candidates. He could simply use Anara as a new dungeon for the people of Winterfell. After all, there were so many conspiracies and quests in this world, and a large group of people from Winterfell coming here to complete the quests would surely sweep away the candidates. If Kara were to come, she'd probably become the most famous adventurer on the continent of Anara in no time. Mutants, Kryptonians, High Elf priests, and Cybertronians could all come and play on this continent, surely finding it a great place to spend time. Would that alert the enemy? Laura listened to David and Tony's discussion, worried that the Sarkhan, upon seeing the situation, would flip the table and blow up the continent. That's possible, but it's not like I've been doing nothing lately. I know. You've been flirting with Elsa every day. Congratulations on conning another girl. David spread his hands, revealing that he was actually studying Elsa's powers. Elsa was created with the power of the world of Brunia. Theoretically, I can master her powers. Elsa's powers weren't simply ice and snow, they also contained many abilities similar to rules. David had also gained insights while teaching Elsa. So, you can now freeze everything like Elsa. Given enough time, I could do more than that, but this is enough for now. Seeing Tony and Laura's expressions of "I don't understand," explain it more bluntly, David answered in the most straightforward way possible. If the Sarkhan turned the table and tried to use Yanara as a bomb, David could freeze the entire continent, preventing its energy from erupting. You've reached this point now. Tony examined David in astonishment. He still looked like the familiar young man, yet he was capable of such terrifying feats. Does teasing a young girl have this kind of benefit? David decided to ignore Tony's rant and put an end to the topic. Anyway, since you've mastered the Sarkhan's special technology and made it so that the continent of Yanara can no longer remain in absolute isolation, I don't have to guard this place anymore, so, I'm going back to Winterfell. I'll come back and play when I'm bored. Yeah, that's a perfectly reasonable decision. Tony thought David's decision was correct. A king should return to Winterfell and rule. Why would he be wandering around like that? What would become of his men if he did all this? Besides, there was another important matter waiting for David back in Winterfell. A newcomer arrived in Winterfell yesterday. I think you need to personally greet him. Oh, David noticed something was wrong with Tony's reaction. Who could so frighten the fearless Iron Man? Could it be that some famous and powerful demon had come to Winterfell? Just as David's mind was constantly sifting through the many powerful and terrifying beings he could think of, Tony also said the name of the newcomer. The new guy is called John Constantine, so it's him. After hearing the name, David understood why Tony was so afraid of him. Which version is it? The Savior? Thank goodness, Winterfell is saved. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 446 Constantine. Is this David's kingdom? Elsa and Anna stood on the rooftop of Glamorgan Castle, gazing at the densely packed buildings, their mouths gaping in shock at David's true identity. They had never imagined that the handsome young man who had saved them, and their sister, wasn't just an ordinary priest, but a true king. It seemed even more fitting. Compared to Arendelle, the Kingdom of Winter was much larger, with far more residents. Just standing there and taking in the seemingly endless stretches of houses and the constant stream of people on the streets was enough to make that clear. This is just Winter City. Elsa and Anna looked at Laura in confusion, confused as to what the difference was. David's kingdom is more than just Winter City. Coming from a more city-state era, Elsa and Anna were completely baffled by this. So, Laura took her two guests from afar to the study and gave them a geography lesson on the eastern part of the Bronian continent. While Laura was showing the princesses around, David was entertaining the newcomers who had arrived in Winter City the day before. Your Majesty, it's a pleasure to meet you. I am John Constantine. The handsome man with short black hair was a little unsure how to greet the king before him. Should he kneel and salute? You're welcome. He raised his hand to signal the man before him not to dwell on the matter. Kneeling was a common practice in Winterfell, and even if David were there, he would make an exception for this man and waive the formalities. The reason was simple: he didn't want to be remembered by this guy, to be suddenly tricked by him. After all, this was the famous Constantine, the most notorious scoundrel in the universe. Even though the man before him was Shui Kang, who was relatively harmless, David remained cautious. If it was a scoundrel, David would likely use banish again. Shui Kang could still stay. Considering his world had God, Satan, and high-ranking angels, it could be said to be a DC parallel universe with a very high ceiling. Do you mind? After a brief greeting, Constantine's true nature was revealed. He didn't care about being king or not, he just wanted a puff. I mind. In David's current state, second-hand smoke wouldn't bother him at all. He simply didn't want ash to fall into his front hall. What a shame, Constantine said, putting his half-empty cigarette back into the box and putting it away. By the way, are there any cigarettes in Winter City? No, David hadn't really implemented a smoking ban, primarily because there wasn't a market demand for them, and David didn't need to rely on them to recoup funds from the people. Currently, Winter City's currency cycle was relatively healthy. Officials weren't worried about how to keep money flowing. After chatting with Constantine for a while and answering some of his questions, Constantine suddenly became curious. I heard that your Majesty is honored as the Lord of Holy Light, so, does signing a contract with you mean I can borrow the power of Holy Light from you? After arriving at this magical place yesterday, Constantine was quickly taken to Castle Glamorgan by Karen and indoctrinated in the common language of Bronian. After learning some basic information, Constantine wandered around Winter City and spent a considerable amount of time in the Cathedral of Light. There, he witnessed the wonders of the Holy Light and learned that the King of Winter Kingdom was the world's most powerful Holy Light wielder. Constantine, who was dying of lung cancer, suddenly had a spark of inspiration. He was worried about how to cure his cancer, but perhaps he could use this miraculous power to heal himself? Although he had learned from the priests of the Cathedral of Light that the power of the Holy Light could be learned by anyone, he doubted that if he were forced to systematically learn such an unfamiliar and mysterious power, he would die before he could even master it. So he wondered if he could sign a contract or something to directly master this power. If His Majesty, the Lord of the Holy Light, Glamorgan, was willing to personally heal him, that would be fantastic. However, considering his frequent encounters with demons and other strange creatures, Constantine felt that learning and mastering this power would be even more helpful. If you want to learn the light, you don't need to sign any contract with me. David was puzzled for a second. Constantine wasn't new to Winterfell. If he knew about the light, didn't he know anyone could learn it? Of course, whether he could learn it or not was another matter. Then he realized that Constantine hadn't been inquiring thoroughly, but rather had a more far-sighted plan. He was trying to drag him down with him. He was such a handsome guy. Why was he playing the same old scumbag trick? Surely Constantine was worthy of him, wasn't he? He'd even considered offering to cure his lung cancer if Constantine agreed to pay for his medical expenses, giving him more time to study. But he swallowed his words back, realizing that Constantine seemed to rely on debt whenever he dragged anyone, gods and demons, down his path. That was a close call. I almost fell into that trap. He simply dropped the question of his healing abilities, reminding Constantine that if he was interested, he could consult Bishop Lyandrin at the cathedral. Hearing David's words, Constantine didn't show much disappointment. He'd just impulsively decided to do it, or perhaps he hadn't held out much hope from the start. Whether or not he could trick anyone wasn't a big deal, it was just a habit. Winterfell possessed the miraculous power of the Holy Light, along with numerous powerful individuals versed in esoteric knowledge and races versed in advanced technology. His illness didn't seem terminal. At a time of near despair, arriving here was a stroke of luck. Having met with His Majesty the King and filling out his personal information yesterday, Constantine would soon receive his ID. Constantine planned to stay in Winterfell for the next period of time, delving into the city's occult knowledge. After meeting Constantine, David returned to Glamorgan Castle and learned that Laura, Elsa, and Anna were strolling through the city, experiencing Winterfell up close. David left Glamorgan Castle and headed to the cafe, where he found Bruce Wayne, who often spent time there. "You haven't used the enhancement potion yet?" "No." "Still struggling?" "No. I'm just enjoying my last few days as a normal human." Bruce saw things clearly. Winterfell was currently relatively stable, and there weren't many opportunities where he'd need to contribute his combat prowess. Whether he used the enhancement potion or not didn't matter to him. As for his own world, with Clark around, there was no need to rush to improve his physical combat prowess. "But I'd like an extra enhancement potion, for Alfred." "Yes, no problem. Speaking of which, if Alfred wants to retire somewhere else, I'd welcome him." Bruce was speechless at David's brazen attempt to poach someone, but thinking of Alfred's decades of service and hard work for the Wayne family, it seemed like he deserved a chance to enjoy life. "I'll pass on your invitation to him." After a brief greeting, they got down to business. David wanted to ask Bruce if he had any suggestions for Winterfell's future development. Bruce knew David wasn't asking about the Kingdom of Winter's development on the Bronia continent, but about the overall situation, particularly the lunar outpost and the Sarkhan on Anara. "Do you think we should eliminate the Sarkhan at the outpost?" Bruce didn't answer David immediately. He was thinking, and quickly came up with an answer. "You're asking me this because you're worried that destroying this outpost prematurely will attract the Sarkhan's main fleet." From David's description, Bruce knew the Sarkhan possessed the combat power to kill planetary life. Furthermore, the Sarkhan Empire was a powerful nation exploring and colonizing the universe, and was particularly hostile to life forms like David. If the lunar outpost was destroyed, they would likely send their main force. The Kingdom of Winter was still developing on the surface and had no ability to engage in space warfare. If the Sarkhan Empire's forces arrived, the Kingdom of Winter and David would be forced to passively defend themselves. The safest approach was to ignore the outpost for now and quickly develop the Kingdom of Winter's space forces. But with enemy surveillance overhead and some Sarkhan causing trouble on another continent, the situation was unsettling. It was only natural that David wanted to eliminate these Sarkhan first. "As much as I dislike this idea, I believe the most reliable solution right now is for you to personally eliminate all the light-forged Sarkhan in the outpost." After considering all the circumstances, Bruce offered his suggestion. This was the most reliable solution he could come up with to avoid attracting the main force of the Sarkhan and buy enough time to develop. Turning the light-forged Sarkhan in the outpost into David's loyal lackeys would not only avoid alerting the Sarkhan on Anara, but would also help Winterfell keep an eye on Anara and the more distant Sarkhan Empire. "That's a good idea. I didn't think of it." David deeply disliked the light-forged tactics, so he subconsciously ignored them. Bruce, however, was different. From a purely objective perspective, he believed that light-forged brainwashing was a very useful ability, perfectly suited to the current situation. Of course, he wouldn't mock David for being stupid, but would simply feel reassured that David had a good moral composure. At least it proved that he hadn't trusted the wrong person. Chapter 447. Everyone started to make trouble. Infiltrate, capture, and lightforge. The cycle repeats itself. Aside from the initial effort, everything else is purely mechanical, repetitive. Since the Sarkhan at the lunar outpost numbered in the thousands, David took considerable time to lightforge the entire outpost. Given the disparity in strength between David and the Sarkhan, failure was a revelation. After completing the lightforge, he learned from the lightforged Sarkhan that the outpost's top fighters were currently busy on the continent of Anara, while the Sarkhan back in Brunio were focusing all their efforts on the artificial Protus project. "I see. From now on, it's business as usual at the outpost." "We'll do what we're supposed to do." He instructed his newly recruited men to continue their tasks, ensuring the Sarkhan Empire wouldn't raise suspicion. He also compiled a list of the elite Sarkhan on Anara. With a list, the situation on Anara was settled, and the Sarkhan couldn't cause any more trouble. Meanwhile, the new year had arrived. The Knights of Tilan and the Winter Legion, through their campaigns, have essentially transformed the former Tilan Kingdom's territory into Winter's. Now, no lord in the entire Winter Kingdom dares to question His Majesty David Glamorgan. Only White Rock City remains unrecovered, still occupied by the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt. Should we set off south? Meanwhile, Edwin Van Cleef has produced new designs and secured David's approval. As long as David travels south and spends some time outside, diggers and the craftsmen of Winter City will quickly construct a new Glamorgan Castle. According to the blueprints, the new Glamorgan Castle will be named Winter Castle. The larger grounds occupied by the new house will reduce the courtyard area and require the demolition of existing buildings like the garage and training room. However, David had no plans to expand Winterhold, which included Winterberg, the town office building, and the Winterberg barracks. A smaller courtyard was sufficient, after all, especially since the new Winterberg had many open-air pavilions. With some planting, they could become a small courtyard. Furthermore, the new Winterberg had more floors and rooms, creating a vast interior space. David and his friends would be able to play hide-and-seek right in their own home. So, take some time to tidy up and put the important things elsewhere, David instructed Helen and Eva before the demolition officially began. Compared to Laura and Gwen, who shuttled back and forth between two worlds, Helen and Eva spent more time at home, and they had the most personal belongings and important items. With a new home under construction, they definitely needed to be well maintained. Even if the demolition didn't damage the house, it would be a real hassle if something buried underneath would be a nuisance. Helen and I have been packing up lately, and Laura and Gwen have already moved their important belongings back to their home. Besides the two of them, Hood, Belfast, and a number of servants were the only people living in Glamorgan Castle. There were originally rooms and a lounge for the guards, but they were never used. I've seen the blueprints for the new Winter Keep. It's taller, larger, and has more rooms, so we'll need more servants. Helen glanced at David. According to her, she meant to continue recruiting from Sparta. After all, the loyalty of those recruited there was guaranteed. Recruiting from the Kingdom of Sparta meant there was no need to worry about them being undercover agents or spies. Furthermore, their existing living conditions made them more likely to be content with their new lives and less likely to feel exploited. That's up to you. Eva and Helen had formed a tacit understanding over time. Eva would help David with external affairs, while Helen would handle domestic matters. As for Laura, she was currently absorbed in her adventures on the continent of Anera. Aside from a while backpacking up, she hadn't been seen recently. According to Laura, she's currently working through the Umbrella Coven storyline with Kara and Ilsa. From her description, the Umbrella Coven seems to be a very long storyline. She's now encountered Alice again, and hopefully, Alice will join her adventuring team. As for Elsa, ever since arriving in Winter City and realizing just how vast the world is, she's been wanting to explore the world, exploring it and honing her abilities. Furthermore, thanks to Tony's two-way teleportation device, David has directly designated Arendelle as a teleportation point, a key base for Winter City's forces on the continent of Anera. Elsa and Anna have no objections to this. They even think this kind of communication is beneficial, and it would be even better if ordinary people from Arendelle could freely travel to Winter City. Because of this, Winter City is now frequently visited by people from Arendelle. They are incredibly curious about this distant kingdom, home to many fascinating races and artifacts. As for whether these people would stay, the two princesses hadn't considered it at all. After all, Princess Anna often stayed in Winterfell, and if Elsa hadn't been dragged out by Laura to adventure, she would have traveled even more frequently than Anna. In the eyes of some, His Majesty, the wise, great, and righteous king, had conquered a new territory, expanding the kingdom of Winterfell's influence to another continent. He truly lived up to the farsightedness of His Majesty David Glamorgan. By the way, Tony's been visiting Westeros quite a bit lately. During their conversation, Eva casually reported to David on some of the interesting things that had been going on recently. David, who had been busy with the Lightforge, had no idea what everyone was doing recently. Taking this opportunity to inquire more closely, he learned that Tony was indeed considering traveling to Westeros and making it his own. He'd been traveling back and forth several times, and it was rumored that he had already established a base in Westeros, fully supporting his distant relative, Eddard Stark, in his bid to seize the entire continent's throne. After all, he couldn't stay there permanently. Eddard initially refused, but Tony's eloquent speeches perfectly persuaded everyone around Eddard. Besides Eddard himself, his wife, children, and subordinates all supported him as the new king of Westeros. Even his closest associates knew that even if Eddard truly became king of Westeros, he would still be overshadowed by a true god. But was being commanded by a true god truly shameful? Not at all. In fact, it was something to be proud of. Many believed that if a true god could be brought in for a brief appearance and declared Eddard Stark the chosen divine messenger, then every faction in Westeros would instantly crown Eddard Stark king without a single battle. However, David and Bruce were preoccupied with the light-forged Sarkin at the time, and Tony Stark couldn't bring himself to confront David over such a minor matter. He believed that Westeros could handle such a minor issue on his own. So what if he wasn't a divine messenger? With the advanced technology at the Starks' disposal, he could still persuade the other factions to surrender and jointly recognize Eddard Stark as king. It's a good thing Tony has something to do. If there wasn't, there's no telling what might happen to Winterfell. Tony Stark's destructive power is immense. Whether in the cinematic universe or the comic book universe, Iron Man is always going to cause all sorts of trouble. Now, let Westeros bear the brunt of all this on behalf of Winterfell. By the way, Logan went to Westeros too. Logan? Why did he go there? Wolverine also likes A Song of Ice and Fire. I've never heard of such a setting. It took Eva's explanation for David to finally understand. It said that Sansa looks a lot like someone. Oh, David nodded. That made sense. Just look at how Bruce, when he has free time, spends most of the day in Maggie Green's coffee shop. Logan might not actually commit a brutal act, but he has a fondness for him. It's normal for him to offer small favors when there's nothing important to do. However, considering Joffrey's death and Sansa's renewed freedom, could they possibly end up together over time? Sansa's still a bit young, so in a few years, maybe it won't be a problem. Thinking of Sansa, David thought of Kira, who is about the same age. Has Edgen been back recently? He came back once, rested in Winterfell for a while, and set out again a few days ago. Edgen and his team didn't bring back much valuable goods the last time they returned, just some relatively common herbs and minerals from Pharaoh. The total value wasn't enough to compensate for the equipment they'd taken. However, this was a long-term business, so Winterfell didn't express any dissatisfaction and settled the matter at a reasonable price. With this successful transaction, Edgen and his companions looked forward to the future. With Kira enjoying a comfortable life in Winterfell, Edgen felt relieved. After spending some time with his daughter, he embarked on another adventure. Edgen was surprised to find a new teammate, Mark Watney. Mark went to Farron. Yes, Leonard, Sheldon, Howard, Raj, and the others also wanted to go to Farron, but they worried about their lack of strength and the possibility of encountering any mishaps. So, they decided to wait until someone they knew in Winterfell wanted to go. Especially Dr. Sheldon Cooper. Chapter 448, Sending a Few Small Tasks. David thought about Sheldon's personality and felt his concerns were justified. Even the closest of friends couldn't stand this guy sometimes. If they teamed up with relatively unfamiliar people, the chances of conflict, being thrown into a dangerous area, or even being killed were quite high. For his own safety, if Sheldon wanted to go to Farron, he had to team up with people he knew. Moreover, according to Eva's description, these people were not in a hurry to go to Farron because they had a project on their hands. After Tony Stark mastered the Sarcom space technology, Howard took on the task of creating an interdimensional communicator. While it's not true that any plane can communicate freely, it's reasonable to be able to communicate relatively freely with a world that has established a stable connection with Winterfell, right? It's said that progress is good, and short messages can now be sent across planes, but there will be a certain delay. Otto Octavius, having recently upgraded Winter City's nuclear engines, joined the team. Their current goal is to achieve seamless message transmission, with a goal of developing instant messaging once that's complete. Once they complete that project, if they want to go to Farron, why not have Edgen take them? Will that count as a mission? Sure. Dr. Sheldon Cooper's reward can be counted as Leonard, Howard, and Raj's combined. These individuals had learned alchemy in Winter City, eaten the golden apple, and now used enhancement potions. They were no longer ordinary people, and traveling wouldn't be a burden. They simply hadn't learned combat skills, or perhaps lacked natural talent for them. Therefore, traveling to a dangerous and complex world like Farron would require specialized protection. As David arranged travel and other benefits for Winter City's outstanding employees, he also learned what everyone had been up to. Norrington's navy was steadily developing. After numerous voyages and the first real voyages into the open sea, the Kingdom of Winter's navy had taken shape. With continued steady growth, it was certain to form a formidable fleet. David didn't rush Norrington into transforming the navy into a space fleet. Training on surface ships was the foundation of a space fleet. By first practicing on surface vessels, the transition to a space fleet would be straightforward. Rather than worrying about whether a space fleet could be established in time, David was more focused on recruiting more fleet commanders. I wonder if Edgen has a hidden talent for this. If so, David would be willing to build him a disc-shaped spaceship. As David was checking in with the people and packing his belongings, the day of departure for the south arrived. Eva and Helen came to see him off, and Anna, Elsa, and the others also came to watch. David was heading south to conquer the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt, and naturally, the entire Winter Knights would be dispatched. The Winter Knights, still less than 100 strong, were no longer the same order of the past, even though they still wore blizzard power armor and wielded piccolo assault rifles. While their weaponry hadn't been significantly enhanced, the transformation of all members into paladins had significantly boosted the Order's combat effectiveness. Now, in addition to wielding a wide range of firearms, the Winter Knights were still capable of unleashing terrifying power with cold weapons. In Floyd's view, even with just a few hundred men, the Winter Knights were more than enough to completely annihilate the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt. As for the temple, even with all the priests, mages, and Templars, they wouldn't be able to defeat it. The Templars, in particular, had been designated a key target. From now on, there would only be one type of paladin on the continent of Brunia, the Paladins of Winter City. Floyd sometimes wondered whether the Winter Knights should be renamed the Winter Paladins, but he abandoned the idea, preferring the simpler and more straightforward Winter Knights. After all, the Winter Knights' primary loyalty lay with David Glamorgan. Holiness wasn't the main concern. Overemphasizing paladins and the holy light puts one in the wrong place. David had no idea Floyd had even struggled with these things. Standing next to the Quinjet, David glanced at the crowd of onlookers not far away and noticed that more people from the Macros world had arrived. Ozma Lee had brought her sister, Lanho Lee, to Winter City. He had also met Lanho Lee's best friend, Nanish Matsura, Michael's childhood sweetheart, Corin Gran, and others. Is that the king here? He doesn't look special. Corin admitted that David was handsome and had good looks, but since he was the king, he couldn't just rely on good looks, could he? Could this king rule the country based on his looks? Don't say that to outsiders. Michael had been in Winter City for some time and had obtained a residence permit and military rank, making him an active member of the military. During this time, besides diligently training and improving his skills, he spent his free time wandering around Winter City, chatting with all sorts of people about all sorts of things. It could be said that his knowledge of Winterfell was undoubtedly the most comprehensive within his small circle. His assessment of King David of Winterfell was particularly thorough. While his opinions were tinged with gossip, anecdotes, and miscellaneous rumors, he was certain of several things. The priests of the Cathedral of Light were all fervent followers of King David Glamorgan. Don't be fooled by the friendly and cordial attitude of the High Elf priests. If anyone dared to question the king, they would be the first to turn against him. Among them, Bishop Lyandrin of the cathedral was his most steadfast follower. It was said that she had abandoned even her own homeland of Quel'Therlas, dedicating herself to Winterfell, serving King David and spreading the teachings of the light throughout Brunia on his behalf. Such a being, revered as the Lord of Light, was certainly not unremarkable. After briefly explaining these matters to Corin recalled the golden, magical power wielded by the knights when he had watched Michael and his team train. Is the Holy Light the same magical power that heals your injuries? Yes. Is His Majesty the King the Master of the Holy Light? I don't know, but His Majesty Glamorgan's mastery of the Holy Light is undoubtedly the greatest in the world. Oh? How powerful. Michael took a deep breath and recounted a rumor he'd heard countless times. It said that the vast majority of the current residents of Winterfell died in a great catastrophe, and it was His Majesty the King who used the incredibly powerful Holy Light to resurrect them and bring them to Winterfell. Corin listened to Michael's words with a look of "Are you telling a fairy tale?" But seeing Michael's serious face, Corin, knowing his childhood friend, immediately realized he wasn't joking. Are you serious? Winterfell's current population exceeded 100,000 and was still growing. Even if it wasn't half of its total, it would still be over 50,000. Possessing the magical power to resurrect a few people, while miraculous, was not unacceptable. Resurrecting over 50,000 people, was that something a human could do? Even in myth and legend, a deity with such power would have to be incredibly powerful, right? Honestly, I find it hard to believe, but the longer I stay here, the more I think it might be true. The more Michael learned, the more he felt his choice was truly wise and correct. However, Corin remained skeptical. She no longer doubted David's ability to easily resurrect tens of thousands of people. She began to wonder if Michael had been brainwashed by some force. Listen to what he just said. What was that? If all this was true, didn't that mean Michael was working for the true God? Did he think he was some kind of chosen one? I'm definitely not. The true chosen one is over there. I'm just a mortal who got a little bit of the protagonist's luck. A flash of light passed through Michael's glasses, and his gaze rested for a moment on Mart, who was standing nearby. Art was asking David if he could fly a fighter jet with him on this trip south, but David refused. Alt, who had never seen the flesh and blood of a battlefield, despite his impressive driving skills, was still a complete rookie. David wasn't about to let Malt rush headfirst into the gruesome battlefield so unprepared. Because of David's interference, Malt hadn't joined the SMS, and naturally, hadn't had the chance to fight. Of course, Alt was being trained to become Winter City's ace, so he couldn't avoid killing people all the time. David decided to let Ozma and Michael guide this rookie. Starting with insects would definitely be easier than killing humans or other humanoids. By the way, keep an eye on Cheryl Nam. While handing Malt over to Ozma, David also gave Michael a small task. If David remembered correctly, Cheryl Nam was about to be abandoned by her manager. Should he then appoint someone to be Cheryl's new manager? Or should he simply have Cheryl move her career to the Bronia continent? A renowned diva's switch of allegiance should surely attract a large number of people to relocate with her, right? Perhaps even a large number of Jeopardy are among them? Who had listened to David's mission announcements throughout, watched the remarkable Lord of Holy Light board the plane before curling his lips and saying, I'm not sure about the other things, but the gossip I've heard about His Majesty before is likely true. Chapter 449, New Toys for the Tiran Knights. The azure sky was cloudless, and the cool, early spring breeze rustled across her face, refreshing her. Combined with the vibrant green of the surrounding grasslands, Verisa was reminded of her hometown, Quel'Thalas. At this hour, the wind in Winterfell still blows like a knife. Sylvanas had lived in Winterfell for several years and had grown somewhat accustomed to its long winters. Although spring, summer, and autumn combined barely matched the length of winter, she no longer found life in Winterfell any different. It seems you've grown accustomed to life in Winterfell. Verisa looked at her second sister, certain she wouldn't return to Quel'Thalas. There's nothing wrong with Winterfell. Here, I can do whatever I want, that's true. As Sylvanas' younger sister, Verisa shared her displeasure with some of Quel'Thalas' actions. She understood the old king's desire to pave the way for Prince Keithus, but emotionally, she couldn't accept it. Since Quel'Thalas didn't care about the Windrunners, there was no need for them to remain in Silver Moon City. How wonderful things were now. Her second sister was highly valued in Winterfell. As Vice Master and Chief Instructor of the Tiran Knights, she was considered a top figure in the Winterfell army. More importantly, His Majesty David Glamorgan of Winterfell wouldn't dismiss Sylvanas simply for doing such a good job. By the way, the army has been stationed here for a while, right? When will the siege begin? Soon. Sylvanas glanced at the distant sky. Several black dots appeared and grew larger. In a matter of moments, they passed overhead, heading towards the nearby camps of the Tiran Knights and the Winterfell Legion. That's, the Winter Knights. The Winter Knights. Verisa wasn't a high-ranking official in the Kingdom of Winter, after all. Although she'd accompanied her second sister on the expedition, certain insider information wouldn't reach her. But the Winter Knights' large-scale deployment could only have one possible explanation. Has that king arrived? She considered pacifying the wars across the Kingdom of Tiran unimportant. The disparity in combat power between the Winter Army and the armies of the various lords was too great. It was natural for the king to be indifferent to such a foregone conclusion. He'd quietly remain in the capital, wait for the war to end, and take a moment to review the reports. Unexpectedly, at the final moment, the king arrived in person with the Winter Knights. Could it be because White Rock City was currently occupied by a neighboring nation? Was this war a matter of concern for the relationship between the two nations? Verisa considered several possibilities, but she didn't know enough about the Bronia continent to know if her guesses were correct. It was Sylvanas who cleared up her confusion. The original Lord of White Rock was Sister Sophia's husband. Furthermore, this battle involves the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt, which has a deep grudge against the Tillan family. She explained the situation to her sister and reminded Verisa, I shouldn't have to contribute much in the upcoming battles. Vice Captain Sutton Stewart will take over the command, so that's how it is. After hearing her sister's explanations, Verisa finally understood why Sylvanas, as the chief instructor, had been leading the Tillan Knights campaigns throughout this journey. The nominal commander, Sutton Stewart, had been nothing but lazy, essentially disregarding everything else. His slacking demeanor could have led anyone who didn't know to mistake Captain Sophia for the real work, and Sutton Stewart for the figurehead. Only then did Verisa realize that Sutton Stewart had deliberately ceded the credit to Sylvanus, conserving all his energy for the attack on the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt and the Temple. After all, that was the blood feud. Just as she was thinking this, she suddenly felt the weather turn cloudy. Verisa felt a little strange, considering the clear, cloudless sky. Looking up, she saw a massive warship floating high in the sky, just blocking out the sun. Sylvanus glanced up. That's Megatron. I didn't expect even Megatron would be sent here. To maintain his position as the Decepticon Supreme Commander, Megatron had constructed a massive hookup unit. This was known to the highest echelons of Winter City, especially the military. Once launched, the Megatron helicarrier was primarily responsible for monitoring the situation within Winter Kingdom and providing aerial artillery support when necessary. Every commander was authorized to call in artillery support when necessary during their missions. However, Megatron's surveillance and support had previously been limited to the northern plains. This time, as they marched south to reclaim their territory and wage war against the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt, Sylvanus had assumed Megatron's support wouldn't be forthcoming. Unexpectedly, they were finally on the battlefield. It was clear that His Majesty David Glamorgan wanted to completely and utterly eliminate his enemy, leaving them no chance. With the forces currently deployed by Winterfell outside White Rock, Sylvanus felt that even annihilating the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt, let alone the Temple, wouldn't be too much of a problem. Meanwhile, David, disembarking from the Quinjet, arrived at Gareth Stanton's main tent. Besides Commander Gareth, Sutton Stewart and Sophia were also present. David first exchanged a smile with Sophia, then looked at Earl Sutton Stewart, clad in Berean light armor, completely devoid of his usual playful, angry, and unruly demeanor. You look so serious. I'm not used to it, Your Majesty. You've arrived just in time. I was just about to retake White Rock City. Good. I've caught a good show. David took a look. It looked like they were planning to hand over the task of retaking White Rock City entirely to the Knights of Tiran. And since Sylvanus wasn't present, it looked like Sutton was planning to do it himself. Just then, a Tiran knight entered with 2 letters. He had intended to give them to the captain, Lady Sophia, and the deputy captain, Sutton Stewart, but he noticed the king was also there. The knight reacted quickly, holding up the letters in his hand and saying, "The Otto family in White Rock City has sent 2 letters to the captain and the deputy captain." Sophia glanced at David, and when she saw David nod, she took the letters and began to read. Sutton Stewart read faster, scanning it briefly before handing it directly to David. Those guys are quite astute. David scanned the contents of the letter and found little of importance. Most of it consisted of polite exchanges about building ties with Sutton and reminiscing about the past. The truly useful information consisted of a few sentences. During the Tilan army's siege, the Otto family offered covert assistance, enabling the Tilan army to breach the city gates and capture White Rock more quickly. Other than that, it mentioned that White Rock, plagued by repeated wars, might face numerous challenges, and that the Otto family could assist in its management. Hey, David finished the letter, admiring the astuteness of these guys while also secretly cursing their shamelessness. These people were incredibly shameless. After reading the letter, Sophia handed David hers. David took another look and found the contents largely identical, albeit with more polite, rapport-building remarks. In particular, Sophia's sister, Lana, was mentioned every 3 sentences, as if she couldn't speak without her name. Did these guys hinder you when you were defending White Rock City from the Holy Gaunt Kingdom? Back then, Pryor was there to intimidate them, but I think they assumed I couldn't hold out for long and that White Rock City would fall sooner or later, so they didn't do anything covert. If Sutton Stewart held off the Holy Gaunt Kingdom's army in White Rock City for too long, it was hard to say what these guys would do. Your Majesty, what do you think? Gareth quickly scanned both letters while David and Sutton were talking. As a commander, rationally speaking, if there was an easier way to victory, he would certainly support it. However, the situation was different now. What about those Holy Gaunt Kingdom troops in White Rock City? There's no way they could stop the Winter Army. Furthermore, the letter made a huge mistake, calling them the Tilan Army? And this letter was specifically addressed to Sutton and Princess Sophia. They must have done this on purpose. Gareth mentally grumbled at the Otto family's idiotic behavior, but David paid no attention to these little things because he didn't take them seriously. They're just a bunch of traitors. How can they have the guts to negotiate, That's right, traitors. What's so arrogant about that? Sophia slammed the table with the map. Watch me personally take these guys down. The Otto family thought playing the family card with Sophia was a good idea, even slipping in hints like, we, the Otto family and the Tiran family, have a close relationship. We can help each other in the Winter Kingdom. Sophia only looked naive, not truly stupid. But the Otto family didn't expect that Sophia would have a very negative impression of them due to their previous behavior, and Sophia was not a mature politician, unable to see the various benefits of joining forces and only wanted to vent her sister's anger. In addition, in Sophia's eyes, the Otto family was not strong. You should join me here and watch the performance of Deputy Commander Sutton Stewart. Speaking of which, I came here this time to bring some new toys for the Tiran Knights. Oh, 3 new Apocalypse tanks with super heavy cavalry systems. Chapter 450, Winter City is seriously lacking mages. The Apocalypse tank was originally created by Leonard, Howard, Raj, and Sheldon out of boredom. After being spotted by the dwarves, Winterfell passed the modified designs to the dwarves of Ironforge, who then built a fleet of modified Apocalypse tanks and brought them to Northrend to participate in the war against the Lich King. While the modified Apocalypse tanks didn't achieve any impressive results in Northrend, the valuable combat experience they gained did provide Winterfell with some valuable benefits. Howard, in particular, enjoyed tinkering with mechanical gadgets when he was bored. By incorporating combat experience, making some improvements in adjustments, and incorporating some new technologies, the new Apocalypse tank was born. Besides a crystal coating to counter reconnaissance and a vaporizing coating to protect against energy weapons, the new Apocalypse tank also utilizes a stronger new alloy. Other features include a nuclear fusion engine, a multi-purpose missile launcher, a new twin-mounted heavy cannon, and more. The super heavy cavalry system, in particular, grants this Apocalypse tank the ability to transform. Of course, the Apocalypse tank isn't a Decepticon and requires a pilot. Originally, a heavy tank like the Apocalypse required at least 3 pilots. However, after using the new psychoframe, everyone agreed that a single pilot was optimal. David, watching as 3 Apocalypse tanks completely destroyed the walls of White Rock City with a few shots, then transformed into 3 heavy yet agile giant robots, wreaking havoc on the battlefield against the desperate-looking Templars, also came to believe that a single pilot was the best option. Although the pilot requirements are a bit high, after a while, it won't be a problem at all. In fact, the Tiran Knights didn't need the Apocalypse tanks' support in their attack on White Rock City. The Tiran Knights' current heavy cavalry system was more than enough to raze the entire city to the ground. David brought the Apocalypse tank with him to test its effectiveness on the battlefield and to strengthen the Tiran Knights' combat capabilities, especially their offensive capabilities. After capturing White Rock City, the Tiran Knights and the Winter Legion wouldn't stop there but would advance directly into the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt. Along the way, they would likely face obstacles like cities and fortresses. The addition of 3 Apocalypse tanks would further elevate the Tiran Knights' offensive capabilities, further strengthening the intimidating power of the giant robots. Seeing such monstrous enemies, ordinary people would flee without even fighting. Even the most mentally resilient warriors would crumble upon discovering their attacks were futile. It wasn't David's fault, but this time the enemy was a force controlled by devout believers. If they could completely destroy them spiritually, they could avoid endless recurring troubles. He simply wanted to completely annihilate the temple in one fell swoop, not resort to the repetitive tactics of suppressing bandits. There's actually no need to deploy these 3 Apocalypse tanks in this battle. Sylvanas did not participate. She stood beside David with her sister, Verisa, her brother-in-law, Ronan, and their nominal leader, Sophia, watching the performance of the Tiran Knights in the distance. Save them for use when we attack the Holy Kingdom of Gaunt. Perhaps they'll be more effective. It doesn't matter. I'm not afraid of them finding out what weapons we have. David glanced at Sylvanas, the High Elf Ranger General standing beside him. She was wearing the standard-issue Tiran Knights North Wind light armor. Her heavy cavalry gear was parked nearby, arranged like a heavy motorcycle, ready for her to charge into battle if necessary. While not a particularly defensive style, the North Wind light armor still showcased the High Elf's perfect figure. This heavily armored suit, paired with a beautiful elven warrior like Sylvanas, gave David a sudden urge to open a package. As for why Sophia, who wore the same outfit, didn't give David the same feeling, wasn't it obvious? Boom. As they chatted, a series of explosions suddenly erupted in White Rock City. David carefully sensed the explosions but didn't detect any powerful magical fluctuations. This couldn't be the work of the temple. It's a heavy grenade from the Tiran Knights. Sylvanus, as vice captain and chief instructor of the Tiran Knights, was intimately familiar with all their equipment. She immediately identified the weapon. And there's more than one. They must be destroying some important defensive facility. Sylvanus couldn't understand what facility would require the Tiran Knights to fire a continuous barrage of heavy grenades. Hearing the Tiran Knights' equipment, David guessed it was Sutton Stewart's doing. Sutton surveyed the devastated ruins, his helmet displaying a curious look at the life form information. Sutton, dressed in heavy cavalry armor and seemingly a knight in incredibly thick armor, trudged through the ruins, finally finding his target, or rather, one of his targets, in the ruins of a house. I'm MacDonald. Otto, head of the Otto family. Help me, I know who you are. He tucked the helmet, which had completely protected his head, back into his armor, revealing MacDonald Otto's all-too-familiar face. He had never imagined that the heavily armored knight before him, with his impressive physique, would be Earl Sutton Stewart. Suddenly, MacDonald understood everything. Why, after the Winter Kingdom soldiers entered White Rock City, there was no major commotion around them, while the Otto family estate was under attack. Bang! A flash of blue light vanished, and Sutton Stewart shouldered his flute rifle again. Without even a hint of explanation, he coldly ordered his men to kill them all. Search thoroughly. Don't let any of these traitors who have tarnished the reputation of the Otto family escape. Yes, Deputy Captain, just call him Captain, no need to add the word deputy. Yes, Deputy Captain. Hearing his subordinates put emphasis on the word, Sutton Stewart rolled his eyes helplessly, but his helmet hid them from everyone. But even if he couldn't see his men's faces, he could still imagine the frivolous smiles on their faces. Ever since Sutton began receiving various training and spending time with these guys, the knights have increasingly disregarded him, the deputy captain. Of course, this is also related to the noble backgrounds of the members of the Tilan Knights. They are all from old Tilan noble families, so who is afraid of whom? Deputy Captain, some Templars have escaped through the south gate. Did our men pursue them? Yes, Sutton Stewart pondered for a moment, then contacted Ronan via the communicator. Have you detected any magical fluctuations from teleportation spells? No, generally speaking, to completely prevent the enemy from using teleportation spells to escape, appropriate arrangements should be made before the battle. However, the original Mage Corps, magical advisors, and alchemists of the Kingdom of Tiran were either Templar agents or had perished in the explosion. The Kingdom of Winter, having inherited no magical heritage from Tiran, lacked the necessary skills. Jaina could offer some assistance, but she was, after all, a diplomat stationed in Winter City representing another nation, and it was impossible to rely on her for everything. Furthermore, Winter City was currently powerful enough that even if someone escaped using teleportation spells, it wouldn't be a big deal. After all, no matter how hard you tried, there was a limit to how far you could escape. When Winter City unified Brunia, where would you be able to escape to? Sutton's questioning of Ronan was purely due to a chance encounter with a mage who had arrived with the troops. He was determined to squeeze as much out of Ronan as possible, thinking he'd use him for nothing. Ronan didn't seem to mind the question, he had nothing to do anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. But I can't guarantee my judgment is absolutely accurate. After all, I'm still adapting to the magical rules of this world. David, who had been observing the excitement nearby, remembered upon hearing this, the magical rules of this world were set by the god of magic worshipped by the temple. The mastermind behind this god of magic was currently on the continent of Yanila. According to intelligence he had gathered from the outpost, this god of magic had gained powerful magical power from other worlds through the Sarkhan space technology, allowing him to establish the magical rules of Brunia. He was also one of the top fighters at the lunar outpost. Should Laura find him first? Or should they wait for him at the temple? Who knew if the temple's destruction could lead to his release? What would become of Brunia's magical landscape if the god of magic was killed? Would it improve, or worse? If things really got worse, shouldn't he find a new god of magic to clean up the mess? Who would be suitable for this position? David thought it would be best to identify some candidates in advance, so as to avoid wasting time on a last-minute plan when the time came. After much thought, he realized that mages in Winterfell were truly rare. Jaina and Ronan weren't from the Kingdom of Winterfell. Medivh had gone off on his own and was now no one knew where. Steve barely counted as one, and then there was his disciple, Wanda. Others were missing. Mordo and Caecilius had already transitioned to light priests and were also part-time Kamartaj mages. So, combined, they were only half a mage? Helen, who had chosen the arcane, couldn't really be considered a mage either. She was just a Spartan woman who knew how to wield arcane energy. You're so focused on having Mark train shamans, you've forgotten that mages are even more scarce, David thought, frowning. Should I select a few powerful mages and summon them to Winterfell? End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone, see you in the next video.